2 hours after I pushed our daughter into the world, my husband stared down at her tiny, perfect face, looked dead into my eyes, and said the words that shattered my reality. He told the delivery room nurses, "That is not my child," turned on his heel, and walked out the door. I was still bleeding, still shaking from an agonizing 18-hour labor, and begging him to come back and hold her. He never turned around. By sunrise, a sympathetic hospital security guard would show me the truth on a grainy surveillance monitor. My husband had spent the night 2 floors down, lovingly cradling another woman's newborn baby. My name is Chloe Jenkins. I am 31 years old, and I work as a senior payroll accountant. For 7 years, I was the quiet, invisible financial backbone running my husband Bradley's life. Bradley came from a family that valued the appearance of wealth far more than the reality of hard work. His parents, Susan and Robert, lived in a sprawling estate and spent their days at the country club, but their actual bank accounts were stretched incredibly thin. Bradley was just like them. He was full of grand visions for his real estate brokerage, wearing tailored suits and leasing luxury cars, while I worked 60-hour weeks crunching numbers to keep the lights on and the creditors at bay. I did it because I loved him. I thought that was what a partnership meant. When his business struggled, I paid our mortgage. When he needed to take potential clients to high-end restaurants, I transferred money from my personal savings to his checking account. I drove a reliable aging sedan so he could maintain his wealthy image. I told myself it would all be worth it when we finally started a family. I spent my entire pregnancy working overtime, taking on extra freelance tax clients, just to build a solid nest egg for our baby. I bought every single piece of furniture for the nursery. I painted the walls. I planned our future down to the finest detail. I truly believed we were a team building a beautiful life together. That illusion completely evaporated in a sterile hospital room on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had gone into labor the previous afternoon. It was grueling, intense, and absolutely terrifying. I endured 18 hours of searing pain, gripping the cold metal bed rails, pushing until I felt like my body was going to break in half. Through it all, Bradley sat in the corner chair scrolling endlessly on his phone. He did not hold my hand. He did not wipe the sweat from my forehead. Every time the nurses asked him to come support me, he made a vague excuse about answering urgent work emails. I was too consumed by the sheer physical agony of labor to fully process his cold detachment at the time. I just focused on bringing our daughter into the world safely. Finally, the doctor placed her on my chest. Lily. She was beautiful with a shock of dark hair and tiny, grasping fingers. I was crying, overwhelmed with a profound, consuming love that I had never felt before. The nurses were smiling, wiping her down, and wrapping her in a warm blanket. I looked up, searching for Bradley, expecting to see tears of joy in his eyes. I expected him to rush to the bedside to kiss my forehead, to hold the child we had created together. Instead, he stood up slowly, putting his phone in his pocket. He walked over to the bed and stared down at Lily. There was no warmth in his face. His expression was completely blank, almost disgusted. He did not reach out to touch her. He did not look at me. He turned to the attending nurse and spoke in a loud, incredibly clear voice, so that everyone in the room could hear. He said, "That is not my child." The entire delivery room fell dead silent. The heart monitor beeped rhythmically, the only sound cutting through the thick, suffocating tension. The doctor froze with his hands in the air. The nurses exchanged wide-eyed, panicked glances. I thought it was a sick joke. I thought it was a terrible, ill-timed attempt at humor from a man who was simply overwhelmed by the moment. I forced a weak laugh, my voice raspy and broken from screaming. I reached my trembling hand toward him and whispered, "Bradley, stop. Come hold your daughter." He stepped back, pulling away from my reaching hand. He looked down at me with a coldness I had never seen before. It was a look of absolute chilling indifference. "I want a paternity test," he announced to the room. "I am not signing the birth certificate. Do not put my name on anything." "Bradley, what are you doing?" I sobbed, struggling to sit up while the nurses gently pushed me back against the pillows. "Please, what is wrong with you?" He didn't answer. He just turned his back on me, pushed open the heavy wooden door, and walked out into the brightly lit hallway. The door swung shut behind him with a heavy thud. I was left lying there, exposed, bleeding, and utterly humiliated in front of a room full of strangers. The pity in the nurse's eyes felt like physical blows. One of them gently took my hand, whispering soft, comforting words that I could barely hear over the roaring in my ears. I clutched Lily tightly to my chest, my tears soaking into her tiny hospital blanket. I felt a crushing wave of abandonment. The man I had financially supported for 7 years, the man I had just endured physical torment for, had discarded us like trash in our most vulnerable moment, as the medical staff worked quietly to clean me up and check my vitals. The pure, blinding grief slowly began to morph into something else. The raw, bleeding devastation hardened into a sharp, frantic desperation. Why did he leave? Where did he go? Why would he humiliate me in front of the hospital staff and deny a child that was undeniably his? The accountant in my brain, the part of me that dealt in logic and facts, began to scream that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. This was not a random panic attack. This was a calculated exit. I needed answers, and I was going to find them. Before I tell you how I dragged myself out of that hospital bed, uncovered his sick double life, and used my financial expertise to strip his family of everything they owned, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from right now and what time it is there. I love reading your responses and connecting with you all. The door clicked shut and my mind scrambled for a rational explanation. I sat shivering under a thin hospital blanket while the nurses finished tending to me. Lily was finally asleep on my chest, her tiny, warm body rising and falling with every breath. I stared at the blank wall, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Bradley was gone. He had looked at our beautiful newborn daughter and declared she was not his. My accountant brain, trained to find order in chaos, rejected the idea that he meant it maliciously. He had to be having a mental breakdown. That was the only logical conclusion. The stress of his struggling real estate firm, the financial pressure he constantly complained about, the grueling 18 hours he had just spent watching me in agony. It must have caused a psychological snap. He was probably wandering the hospital corridors right now, confused and overwhelmed, or sitting in his car, crying into his hands. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers and unlocked the screen. I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted him, pleading with him to tell me where he was, promising that we could work through whatever panic attack he was experiencing. Nothing. By 3 a.m, the maternity ward was quiet. I could not sleep. The adrenaline and fear coursing through my veins made it impossible to simply lie back and rest. I needed to know if my husband was safe. I needed to know if he had driven off in a manic state, or if he was still somewhere in the building. I carefully shifted Lily into the clear plastic bassinet beside my bed, tucking her blanket securely around her. Then I forced my legs over the edge of the mattress. The pain was blinding. My core felt hollowed out, and a sharp, searing pain radiated through my lower half with every tiny movement. I gripped the cold metal frame of the bed to steady myself, biting my lip to keep from crying out. I grabbed my rolling IV pole, using it as a makeshift walker, and slowly, painfully shuffled my way out of the room. The walk to the nurse's station felt like a marathon. The night nurse looked up from her computer in alarm when she saw me leaning against the counter. I begged her to call security. I explained my husband had left hours ago, under severe mental distress, and I was terrified he might have collapsed somewhere in the hospital or hurt himself. My voice was cracking, the raw desperation of a new mother terrified for her husband, spilling out into the quiet hallway. A security guard standing near the elevators overheard the commotion. He saw me shaking, gripping the IV pole with white knuckles, and taking pity on my situation. He walked over. He gently guided me to a chair behind the desk. He pulled out his radio and asked the dispatch room to track a man matching Bradley's description using the hospital's internal surveillance network. We waited in silence. Every second felt like an hour. I kept imagining Bradley collapsed in a stairwell. Then the guard's radio crackled. The dispatch officer confirmed they had found footage of Bradley leaving my delivery room exactly when I said he did. The dispatcher said the subject never went to the parking garage. Instead, the cameras caught him walking to the main elevator bank. The guard asked the dispatcher to send the video feed directly to the desktop monitor at our station. A few seconds later, the screen flickered to life, displaying a grid of black and white security footage. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the grainy image of my husband. He was not stumbling. He was not clutching his chest in a panic attack. He was walking with purposeful, confident strides. We watched him step into the elevator. The camera inside the cab showed him fixing his hair in the reflection of the metal doors, adjusting his expensive tailored jacket. He did not look like a man having a mental breakdown. He looked like a man going to a very important meeting. The elevator stopped 2 floors down. The screen switched to a new camera angle displaying a wide, brightly lit corridor. I recognized the signage on the wall immediately. It was the neonatal intensive care unit. I leaned closer to the monitor, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Why would Bradley go to the NICU? Then I saw her. A blonde woman was sitting in a hospital wheelchair just outside the double doors of the intensive care ward. She looked exhausted but radiant, wearing a plush designer robe over her hospital gown. Bradley walked directly up to her. He did not hesitate. He leaned down, framed her face with both of his hands, and kissed her. It was a deep, intimate, desperate kiss. The kind of kiss a man gives the woman he loves after a long, terrifying ordeal. I sat frozen in the chair, completely paralyzed. The security guard quickly reached out to turn off the monitor, clearly mortified by what he had just uncovered. But I grabbed his wrist, stopping him. I could not look away. I had to see it all. A moment later, an intensive care nurse walked out of the double doors, carrying a small bundle wrapped in a blue and pink striped blanket. The nurse smiled warmly and handed the bundle directly to Bradley. It was a baby. A newborn baby boy. Through the grainy security feed, I watched my husband, the man who just 2 hours prior had looked at our daughter with absolute disgust, look down at this little boy with a completely different expression. His shoulders softened. His face lit up with a brilliant, overwhelming smile. He brought the baby close to his chest, cradling the tiny head with a profound protective tenderness that I had spent my entire pregnancy dreaming he would show to our child. He leaned down and kissed the blonde woman again, his free hand resting gently on her shoulder while he held the newborn boy against his heart. The world around me simply ceased to exist. The beeping monitors, the hum of the hospital, the concerned voice of the security guard asking if I needed water. It all vanished into a ringing vacuum of white noise. My grief evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating shock. The narrative I had frantically constructed to excuse his behavior shattered into a million jagged pieces. Bradley did not have a psychological break. He had not abandoned the concept of fatherhood out of fear or financial pressure. He was perfectly capable of being a loving, devoted father. He simply did not want to be a father to my child. He did not want to be a husband to me. He had spent the entire night cradling another woman's baby while I lay bleeding and weeping alone 2 floors above him. The betrayal was so absolute, so meticulously cruel, that it bypassed my emotions entirely and struck a deep, dormant nerve of pure survival. The tears stopped falling. My hands stopped shaking. I stared at the frozen image on the screen, burning the face of that blonde woman into my memory. He had not just walked out of our marriage. He had engineered an escape to a completely different life. But who was she? And how long had my husband been living this devastating lie while using my bank account to fund it? The discharge papers felt like lead in my hands. 48 hours after delivering a human being into the world, I was sitting in the back of a gray Uber, clutching my newborn daughter to my chest. The driver, a kind, older man, kept throwing sympathetic glances in the rearview mirror. He clearly did not know what to say to a woman leaving the maternity ward, completely alone, with no husband holding the car seat, and no flowers in sight. Every bump in the pavement sent a jarring spike of pain through my healing body, but the physical agony was entirely eclipsed by the cold knot sitting in my stomach. The image from the security monitor played on a continuous, agonizing loop behind my eyelids. Bradley holding another baby. Bradley kissing another woman. I paid the driver and hobbled up the concrete walkway to our front door. The house looked exactly the same as it had when my water broke 2 days ago. The manicured lawn, the neatly trimmed hedges, the facade of a perfect suburban life. It was a life I had financed completely on my own through endless tax seasons and brutal corporate audits. I balanced Lily carefully against my shoulder and pushed the front door open, expecting the house to be dark and empty. Instead, I heard the low murmur of voices coming from the kitchen. I did not head toward them right away. My first instinct, the deep biological urge of a new mother, was to put my exhausted baby down in a safe place. I limped down the hallway toward the nursery. I had spent 6 months preparing that room. I had painted the walls a soft sage green. I had used my entire year-end corporate bonus to purchase a custom mahogany crib, a high-end glider chair, and a state-of-the-art vital signs monitor. I had washed and folded dozens of tiny organic cotton outfits, tucking them neatly into the pristine white dresser. I pushed open the nursery door, and the breath was knocked completely out of my lungs. The room was completely bare, not just disorganized or messy. Bare. The mahogany crib was gone. The glider chair was missing. The white dresser had been hauled away. Even the tiny outfits I had so carefully washed were gone from the closet. The only thing left in the room was the faint smell of fresh paint and the rectangular indentations in the plush carpet, where the heavy furniture used to sit. My brain short-circuited. For a wild, terrifying second, I thought we had been robbed. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles turning white, staring at the empty space where my daughter was supposed to sleep. The items I had worked 60-hour weeks to afford the things I had bought with my own hard-earned money had simply vanished. A sharp, bitter realization sliced through the fog of my exhaustion. A random burglar would not steal folded newborn onesies and leave the expensive television in the living room. I turned away from the empty nursery and marched down the hallway toward the kitchen, propelled entirely by adrenaline. When I rounded the corner, I found Bradley sitting at the granite island. Beside him, sipping a cup of coffee, with an expression of sheer, unadulterated contempt, was his older brother Tyler. Tyler had always despised me. He viewed my working-class roots as a stain on their family legacy, and he never missed an opportunity to remind me that I lacked their supposed pedigree. I opened my mouth to demand an explanation. I was ready to scream about the nursery, ready to unleash the fury of a woman who had just seen her husband kissing another woman on hospital surveillance. But Bradley did not give me the chance to speak. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He slammed his hand flat against the countertop. "Do not even try to play the victim, Chloe," he shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I flinched, stepping back instinctively to shield Lily. The sheer force of his aggressive anger was entirely unexpected. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, performing the role of a devastated, betrayed husband with chilling accuracy. "Tyler told me everything," Bradley continued, his voice dripping with righteous fury. "He told me about the rumors. A friend of his saw you at that downtown hotel 9 months ago. You were having drinks with that senior tax partner from your accounting firm. The one you always took those late-night business trips with." I stared at him in absolute bewilderment. I had no idea what he was talking about. I had never been to a hotel with a partner from my firm. I had spent the last 9 months working myself to the bone to cover his real estate debts. The accusation was so entirely baseless, so incredibly fabricated, that my mind struggled to process the sheer audacity of the lie. "You are a liar, Chloe," he spat, taking a step closer. "You manipulated me. You used my desire for a family to trap me into raising another man's child. I demand a paternity test. I am not paying a single dime for a kid that belongs to someone else." Tyler leaned back in his chair, swirling his coffee. "We know the truth." Chloe, Tyler said, his tone dangerously quiet. "You thought you could secure a permanent meal ticket by passing off your little mistake as my brother's kid. It is pathetic, really." I stood frozen in the kitchen, holding a sleeping infant, while 2 men orchestrated a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Bradley was pacing the floor, running his hands through his hair, acting out a perfectly scripted scene of masculine heartbreak. Any outsider watching this would have believed he was a broken man whose entire world had just been shattered by a cheating wife. But I was not an outsider. I was an auditor, and in that terrifying, chaotic moment, the panic completely evaporated. The tears I had been holding back dried up instantly. I saw straight through the matrix of his performance. Bradley did not believe I had cheated on him. Tyler did not have a mysterious friend who saw me at a hotel. This entire confrontation was a meticulously designed preemptive strike. Bradley knew he was abandoning his marriage to go live with the wealthy blonde woman from the neonatal ward. He knew that walking out on a woman who had just given birth to his child would destroy his reputation and threaten the lucrative business deals his family relied upon. So he was rewriting the narrative. He was manufacturing a fake scandal to justify leaving me. He needed to make me the villain so he could play the tragic victim. He was trying to put me on the defensive. He wanted me to cry, to beg, to frantically defend my honor, while he gracefully exited our marriage without facing any social or financial consequences. I looked from Bradley's fake outrage to Tyler's smug, satisfied smirk. They thought I was just a naive, exhausted woman they could easily steamroll. They thought the shock of the accusation would crush me, but they were wrong. My mind was already racing past their fabricated drama, shifting focus to a much more practical, immediate problem. I did not care about defending myself against a lie that we all knew was fake. I only cared about the glaring, undeniable absence in the other room. I held my daughter tighter, taking a slow, steady breath. Bradley could spin whatever fairy tale he wanted about hotel rooms and coworkers. But right now, I had one single burning objective. I needed to find out exactly where my nursery furniture went and who had authorized its removal. Bradley did not wait for my response to his fabricated outrage. Having delivered his meticulously crafted lines, he turned on his heel and marched toward our master bedroom. I stood in the kitchen doorway holding Lily tightly to my chest, listening to the heavy thud of dresser drawers being yanked open and slammed shut. Tyler remained at the kitchen island, his arms crossed over his chest, watching me with a smug, self-satisfied grin that made my stomach churn. Within 10 minutes, Bradley reemerged, carrying a large leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked at me one last time, perfectly playing the part of a wounded, betrayed man whose honor had been dragged through the mud. He announced he was staying at Tyler's house until the supposed paternity test results came back. He warned me not to call him, grabbed his keys from the granite counter, and walked out the front door without a single glance at the newborn baby in my arms. Tyler followed close behind, casting one final look of pure disdain in my direction, before the heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in a house that suddenly felt incredibly cold and foreign. The silence that settled over the living room was deafening. I walked slowly to the sofa and sat down, gently rocking Lily until her breathing deepened into a peaceful, rhythmic slumber. My body ached with every subtle movement, a harsh, stinging reminder of the grueling physical trauma I had just survived. But the luxury of rest was a privilege I simply could not afford right now. The hospital had sent an automated notification to my phone earlier that morning regarding the remaining balance for my deductible and copay. I needed to settle the medical bills before the late fees started accumulating. I reached for my work laptop on the coffee table, balancing it carefully on the armrest. As I waited for the computer to boot up, my mind drifted to the grueling sacrifices I had made to build our financial safety net. For the past 2 years, Bradley constantly claimed his commercial real estate brokerage was going through a severe dry spell. He blamed the economy, the housing market, the interest rates. To keep us afloat and prepare for the enormous expense of a new baby, I took on every single overtime shift my accounting firm offered. I worked 60-hour weeks while heavily pregnant. I vividly remembered sitting at my desk with swollen ankles, my back screaming in agony, reviewing endless payroll ledgers and complex corporate tax audits late into the night. Every extra dollar I earned, every holiday bonus I was awarded, went straight into our joint savings account. I had managed to stockpile $45,000. It was supposed to be our absolute security. It was the money that would cover my unpaid maternity leave pay for the delivery and keep a roof over our heads while Bradley supposedly rebuilt his struggling client list. I opened my web browser and navigated to our bank's online portal. I typed in my credentials, expecting to see that comforting 5-digit balance sitting safely in our joint account. The loading icon spun for a few seconds. When the page finally rendered, I blinked, rubbing my tired eyes, assuming my extreme sleep deprivation was making me see things incorrectly. I refreshed the browser. The numbers on the screen did not change. The available balance in our joint savings account was $0.42. A wave of pure, unadulterated nausea washed over me so intense I had to lean forward to keep from passing out. My hands began to tremble so violently that I could barely maneuver the computer mouse. I clicked on the transaction history tab, my heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against my ribs. A single, massive withdrawal had been initiated 3 days ago, right around the time I was admitted to the hospital maternity ward, in the early, agonizing stages of labor. $44,999 had been transferred out in one swift, devastating motion. The destination was listed simply as an external wire transfer to an unknown corporate account. He did not just walk out on our marriage. He robbed me blind while I was physically pushing his child into the world. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. My mind raced, connecting the terrifying dots. The empty nursery down the hall was not an act of petty spite. The ridiculous accusation about a coworker was not a fragile male ego lashing out in pain. It was a deliberate, highly calculated smokescreen. Bradley had orchestrated a premeditated financial hit. He had systematically drained the life savings I had sacrificed my physical and mental health to build, leaving me entirely destitute with a 2-day-old infant. He thought the trauma of childbirth combined with the emotional devastation of his fake cheating accusations would completely break me. He assumed I would collapse into a puddle of hysterical tears, too weak, too distracted, and too humiliated to look closely at the bank statements until he was miles away and the money was untraceable. He believed I would be so busy trying to defend my honor and beg for his return that I would not notice the financial ground being pulled out from under me. But Bradley made a catastrophic miscalculation. He forgot exactly who he had married. I am a senior payroll accountant. My entire professional career is built on tracking financial anomalies, uncovering hidden assets, and finding the absolute truth buried beneath stacks of deceptive, fraudulent paperwork. Sitting on that sofa, a profound physiological shift occurred within me. The agonizing heartbreak, the deep confusion, the desperate need for my husband to simply hold his daughter. It all evaporated into the quiet air. The tears that had been threatening to spill over my eyelashes completely dried up. In their place, a cold, sharp razor-focused rage took root deep in my chest. The weeping, discarded wife vanished, and the forensic auditor stepped forward. I looked down at Lily. Her tiny hands curled into fists against my chest, and I made a silent, unbreakable promise to her. They were going to pay for what they did. I pulled a fresh legal pad from the coffee table drawer, grabbed a red pen, and stared at the digital wire transfer confirmation illuminating my screen. The emotional breakdown was over. The investigation had officially begun. The glare of my laptop screen was the only source of light in the quiet living room. I sat perfectly still on the edge of the sofa, with Lily sleeping soundly against my chest. I listened to the soft, delicate rhythm of her breathing while my fingers flew across the keyboard. I opened a blank digital spreadsheet. This was my domain. Bradley actually thought he could blindside me with a fabricated infidelity scandal, drop a fake bomb about my character, and simply walk away with my entire life savings. He forgot that I spent the last decade of my life hunting down missing corporate assets and exposing financial discrepancies for a living. I did not need to cry right now. I needed a paper trail. I started by navigating to our primary consumer banking portal. I wanted to access our detailed joint savings ledger to trace the exact routing number of the massive withdrawal. I typed in my usual login credentials and pressed enter. A bright red error message immediately flashed across my screen. Access denied. Password incorrect. He had locked me out. He had actually changed the login credentials the moment he walked out the door. He genuinely believed that changing a basic bank password would block me from accessing my own money. It was almost laughable in its stupidity. Bradley was a flashy real estate broker who barely understood how to convert a basic document into a PDF file. I was a senior payroll accountant who had personally designed and set up the entire back-end financial infrastructure for his business and our personal lives. I did not bother wasting time trying to guess his new password or answering security questions. Instead, I bypassed the consumer banking portal entirely. I opened a new tab and logged directly into the master administrative software I used to manage his brokerage taxes and quarterly filings. I had securely linked our joint savings account to his primary business dashboard years ago to easily transfer funds whenever his company was struggling to make payroll. Through the back-end developer portal, I had full, unrestricted viewing access to every single transaction that moved in or out of our accounts. I pulled the master ledger for the last 36 months, selected the raw data, and hit download. As the file populated, row after row of our shared financial history filled my screen. I grabbed my red pen and a fresh legal pad. I was not just looking for the missing $45,000 anymore. I was conducting a full-scale forensic audit of my entire marriage. Looking at the raw data in black and white was like reading a tragic diary of my own foolish devotion. The numbers told a story of absolute financial parasitism. I scrolled back to our second year of marriage. There it was glaring at me from the screen. A single line item for $18,000. I had liquidated my early retirement portfolio to pay off a massive mountain of credit card debt Bradley had hidden from me when we first met. He had sworn he was just having a slow sales quarter and needed a lifeline. I paid it without a second thought because that is exactly what a supportive, loving wife does. I scrolled further down the ledger, tracking his monthly recurring expenses. $850 every single month for the past 3 years. That was the lease payment for his luxury imported SUV. Bradley constantly insisted he needed a top-tier vehicle to drive wealthy investors around to commercial property viewings. He claimed it was a necessary investment in his professional image. I funded that image entirely. I drove a 12-year-old sedan with a rattling transmission through harsh winters so my husband could look highly successful while he secretly courted another woman. Line by line, I highlighted the financial bleeding. The expensive golf club membership he claimed was vital for networking. The thousands of dollars in high-end restaurant dinners he categorized as client acquisition costs. I had worked double shifts taking on brutal freelance tax audits during the holidays just to cover these lavish expenses. I had exhausted my body during my pregnancy to build the exact $45,000 nest egg he had just stolen. Sitting in the dark, I was looking at the precise monetary value of my physical and emotional exhaustion, but I refused to let the anger consume me. I channeled every single ounce of that fury into the digital hunt. I scrolled to the very top of the ledger and isolated the exact date and time of the massive withdrawal. It occurred exactly 2 hours after I was admitted to the hospital labor and delivery ward. While I was screaming in agonizing pain, begging the nurses for relief, Bradley was sitting in the corner chair using his smartphone to wire my money out of our account. I clicked on the specific transaction details, expanding the raw data to view the clearinghouse routing string. I needed to see exactly where that money landed. I naturally assumed he had transferred it to a private hidden checking account in his own name, or perhaps directly into his brother Tyler's personal bank account, to hold on to until the dust settled. But the routing sequence did not match a standard consumer bank account. The numeric structure indicated a commercial tier transfer. The receiving institution was a corporate banking branch. I copied the receiving account number and ran it through a secure vendor verification database I used regularly for corporate payroll auditing. The search query spun for a few agonizing seconds before the official registration details populated on my screen. The $45,000 did not go to Bradley. It did not go to Tyler's personal checking account. The destination account was registered to a commercial entity named Horizon Zenith Limited Liability Company. I stared at the corporate registration name glowing in the dark room. The sheer calculation of it sent a fresh wave of ice running through my veins. This was not a panicked, desperate husband grabbing cash on his way out the door. This was a highly sophisticated, premeditated financial maneuver. Bradley had funneled my life savings into a corporate shell game to hide the assets from any standard divorce discovery process. He was actively laundering my money through a commercial entity to ensure I could never trace it or touch it during a legal settlement. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as my breathing steadied. The cheating and the fake paternity test were just surface-level distractions meant to keep me hysterical and off balance. The real betrayal was buried deep in state tax registries and corporate property deeds. I was dealing with a coordinated financial crime, and I was going to drag it entirely out of the shadows. The name Horizon Zenith Limited Liability Company stared back at me from the illuminated screen. It sounded so sterile and official. It was the kind of generic corporate entity that wealthy individuals use to mask their assets and hide their money from public scrutiny. But I knew exactly how to rip that mask off. My daily routine as a senior accountant involved navigating dense bureaucratic mazes and tracing corporate funds through endless layers of misdirection. A simple shell company was not going to stop me. I opened a new tab on my web browser and navigated straight to the Ohio Secretary of State Business Search Portal. This is a public database available to anyone who knows exactly what to look for. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, typing the exact name of the entity into the search bar. I hit the enter key, and waited while the government server processed the inquiry. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed exceptionally loud in the silent house, while the little loading wheel spun on my screen. The official registration document finally populated. I scrolled past the initial filing dates and the standard operating clauses, looking for the one piece of information that mattered most. I needed the name of the managing member, or the registered agent. I needed a human face to attach to this theft. My eyes scanned down to the bottom of the digital page. There, under the section designating the primary managing director, was a name I recognized instantly. Tyler Jenkins. I stopped breathing. The air in my living room suddenly felt thick and unbreathable. Tyler, my husband's older brother. The same man who had been sitting at my kitchen island just a few hours ago, slowly sipping his coffee and glaring at me with absolute moral superiority. The man who had sneered at me and accused me of trapping his brother with another man's child. The sheer level of sociopathic deception made my stomach turn. While Tyler was sitting in my house pretending to be disgusted by my supposed infidelity, he was fully aware that he had actively helped his brother steal my entire life savings. He had literally created the corporate vehicle used to funnel the money out of my account. Tyler had watched me stand there exhausted and bleeding holding a newborn baby, knowing exactly how completely they had ruined me. My shock rapidly morphed into a profound, searing clarity. I pushed the laptop back slightly, rubbing my temples. If Tyler had registered this shell company, there had to be a specific reason for it. Bradley would not just park $45,000 in his brother's corporate account to let it sit idle. They were real estate brokers. They dealt in property. That was their entire world. I opened another tab and pulled up the Franklin County Auditor website. This database holds public records of every single property transaction, tax assessment, and deed transfer in the region. I selected the property search function and changed the search parameter from a personal name to a business entity. I typed Horizon Zenith into the owner field. The system generated a single matching result immediately. It was a property deed transfer filed exactly 2 weeks ago. I clicked on the parcel number to view the full details. The property was a luxury townhouse located in a highly exclusive gated community on the north side of the city. It was an area known for manicured lawns, private security, and expensive homeowner association fees. The kind of neighborhood the Jenkins family always aspired to live in, but could never actually afford on their own. I scanned the financial details of the transaction. The total purchase price was steep, but what caught my eye was the recorded down payment, $45,000. The exact amount drained from my joint savings account had been used to secure the keys to this property. My money, the funds I had built working endless double shifts and navigating brutal corporate tax seasons while heavily pregnant, had purchased a luxury home for another woman. And then, a completely different, terrifying realization hit me. I thought back to the empty nursery down the hall. I thought about the custom mahogany crib, the expensive electronic glider chair, the top-of-the-line baby monitor, and the dozens of tiny outfits I had so carefully washed and folded. I had initially assumed Bradley sold those items to a pawn shop or an online buyer to get quick cash for his escape. But seeing the address of this new townhouse, the horrific truth crystallized in my mind. They did not sell my nursery furniture. They relocated it. While I was trapped in a hospital bed, enduring 18 hours of agonizing labor, pushing a child into the world, Bradley and Tyler must have rented a moving truck. They drove to my house, backed into the driveway, and systematically stripped my daughter's room bare. They loaded up the crib I bought the clothes I folded, and the chair I planned to rock my baby in. They drove all of it across town, and set it up inside that luxury townhouse for the blonde woman from the hospital and her newborn son. The level of cruelty was almost incomprehensible to a normal human brain. This was not a simple case of a husband having an affair and deciding to leave his marriage. This was a highly coordinated, sophisticated conspiracy involving multiple members of his family. They had worked together to financially bankrupt me, psychologically torture me, and physically strip my home of my daughter's belongings to furnish a perfect life for his mistress. I closed my laptop and let out a long, slow breath. The darkness of my living room felt different now. It was no longer a place of despair. It had become a war room. The Jenkins family truly believed I was just a naive, exhausted accountant who would quietly accept defeat and fade into the background. They thought their wealth, and their arrogant confidence made them untouchable. They were completely wrong. I looked down at Lily, who was still sleeping peacefully against my chest, completely unaware of the monsters we had been living with. I gently kissed her forehead. I knew exactly what I had to do next. Reading property deeds and corporate filings on a computer screen was not enough. I needed to see this townhouse with my own eyes. I needed to verify the enemy stronghold before I burned it completely to the ground. The fourth morning after Lily was born broke with a harsh, bright sunlight that felt entirely out of place in my shattered world. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest as I forced myself out of bed. Healing from childbirth is supposed to be a time of rest and quiet bonding, a sacred period where the outside world fades away. For me, it was the beginning of a tactical mission. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, examining my pale, exhausted reflection. I did not look like a corporate accountant or a newly single mother. I looked like a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. And people with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous people in the room. I walked into our bedroom and carefully strapped my sleeping daughter into her car seat. Lily was so small, so incredibly fragile, completely unaware that her father had legally and emotionally erased her from his life before she was even 24 hours old. I gently touched her soft cheek, promising her that I would secure our future, no matter what it took. I carried the heavy car seat down the stairs, wincing as a sharp ache radiated through my core. The physical pain was severe, but it grounded me. It kept me sharp. It prevented me from slipping into the paralyzing grief that Bradley was counting on. I loaded Lily into the back of my old sedan. The engine sputtered slightly as I turned the key, a stark reminder of the vehicle I had kept driving for years, just so my husband could lease a luxury car to project a false image of success. I pulled out of my driveway and navigated through the familiar streets of our working-class suburb, heading toward the north side of the city. The drive took 45 minutes, but it felt like crossing into an entirely different universe. The modest homes and crowded strip malls gradually gave way to sprawling estates, manicured golf courses, and towering oak trees. This was the zip code where wealth whispered instead of shouted. This was the exact area Bradley always obsessed over. He used to drive me through these neighborhoods on Sunday afternoons, pointing out the massive brick mansions, claiming that one day his brokerage would land the kind of clients who lived behind these wrought iron gates. Now I knew he had simply found a shortcut. I approached the entrance to the gated community. I knew I could not just drive through the main security checkpoint without drawing attention. Thankfully, the neighborhood was expansive, and the perimeter featured a secondary exit gate intended for residents only. I parked my car on a quiet public side street just 50 yards from that exit. The dense landscaping provided perfect cover. I had a clear, unobstructed view of the specific townhouse unit listed on the property deed I had uncovered the night before. I turned off the engine and cracked the windows to let the cool morning breeze circulate. Lily remained fast asleep in the back, her chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The silence of the car was deafening. Every minute stretched into an eternity. My mind raced through endless scenarios, trying to prepare myself for what I was about to see. Would Bradley be there alone? Would the blonde woman be with him? Would they look guilty or perfectly content? An hour passed. The physical discomfort of sitting in the rigid car seat while recovering from major trauma was becoming unbearable. I shifted my weight, biting the inside of my cheek to endure the stinging pain. I checked my watch. It was nearing 10 in the morning. Just as I was beginning to doubt my entire strategy, I heard the distinct low rumble of a heavy diesel engine approaching from the main boulevard. I slouched down slightly in my seat, peering through the passenger side window. A massive, gleaming black truck turned onto the pristine paved street. I recognized the vehicle instantly. It was the custom truck Tyler had purchased last year, a purchase he bragged about endlessly at family dinners. The truck slowed down, navigating the curves of the wealthy neighborhood before pulling smoothly into the wide, stamped concrete driveway of the exact townhouse I was watching. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs with such violence I thought it might actually crack my sternum. The engine cut off. For a long, terrifying moment, the tinted windows of the truck revealed nothing. Then the passenger side door swung open. Bradley stepped out into the morning sunlight. He was not wearing his usual stiff business suits. He wore casual, expensive weekend clothes, looking entirely relaxed and completely at home. There was no trace of the stressed, frantic man who had abandoned me in a hospital room just 4 days ago. He looked like a man who had finally achieved the life he believed he deserved. He casually walked around the front of the heavy truck, his posture loose and confident. He approached the rear passenger door and opened it wide. He reached inside, leaning forward with a gentle, careful motion. When he stepped back, he was holding a baby carrier. The world around me seemed to shift into sharp, terrifying focus. I watched my husband carefully maneuver the carrier, setting it gently on the driveway. Then he reached his hand back into the truck, offering his assistance to whoever was still inside. A blonde woman stepped down from the cab. It was the exact same woman from the grainy hospital security footage. She wore a stylish fitted jacket, her hair perfectly blown out, looking absolutely flawless, despite having just given birth. She smiled at Bradley, a bright, adoring smile that made my stomach churn with physical sickness. Bradley wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close to his side. He leaned down and kissed her forehead before picking up the baby carrier with his free hand. They turned toward the front door of the luxury townhouse, looking like the picture-perfect image of a wealthy, happy new family returning home. As they walked up the paved path, the woman turned her head slightly to check her reflection in the glass of the front door. The morning sun illuminated her profile perfectly. I stopped breathing. The air simply vanished from the car. I knew that face. I had seen it in glossy real estate brochures, in local business magazines, and on the social media pages Bradley constantly forced me to look at. I had even met her once briefly at a sterile corporate holiday party 2 years ago. It was Jessica. Jessica was not just some random woman he had met at a bar. She was the youngest daughter of a very powerful commercial real estate magnate in the entire state of Ohio. Her family controlled a massive empire of shopping centers, office buildings, and lucrative development contracts. Bradley had spent his entire career desperately trying to secure a partnership with her father. He used to complain bitterly that breaking into their inner circle was impossible for a regular broker. The sheer scale of the betrayal slammed into me like a physical blow. This was never just an affair. It was an acquisition. Bradley had not just found a mistress, he had found a highly calculated entry point into generational wealth. He had gotten Jessica pregnant at the exact same time I was carrying Lily. But Jessica offered him a golden ticket to the elite social tier he craved, while I was just the tired, overworked accountant struggling to pay his bills. He had orchestrated my financial ruin and abandoned our daughter, not out of sudden panic, but as a deliberate strategic business move. He needed to erase my existence completely so he could step seamlessly into his new role as the son-in-law of a real estate billionaire. I sat in my battered sedan watching the heavy front door of the townhouse close behind them. I was no longer just a discarded wife. I was the only person standing between Bradley and his stolen empire, and I knew exactly what my next move had to be. The heavy oak door of the townhouse clicked shut, sealing Bradley and his new, shiny family inside. I remained frozen behind the steering wheel of my 12-year-old car, the engine ticking quietly as it cooled. The bright morning sun beat down through the windshield, but my hands felt entirely numb. My mind, a space usually organized into neat columns of logic and numbers, was spinning wildly as the horrific timeline of the last 9 months suddenly aligned with absolute mathematical precision. Jessica was carrying a newborn, a baby boy wrapped in a pristine cashmere blanket. Judging by his size, he could not be more than a week or 2 old. The biological reality of that fact crashed over me like a tidal wave. Bradley had gotten the daughter of a real estate billionaire pregnant at the exact same time I was carrying Lily. While I was struggling through debilitating morning sickness, forcing myself to take on extra freelance tax clients, so we could afford diapers and a custom crib, my husband was actively charting a parallel existence. He was playing the role of an expectant father in 2 completely different households, waiting to see which investment would yield the highest ultimate return. The sickening contrast between my reality and hers was staggering. I was the reliable, invisible workhorse. I paid the utility bills, I funded his tailored suits, and I covered the massive hidden debts he constantly racked up playing the part of a highly successful commercial broker. I was the safety net that kept his credit score intact and his refrigerator stocked. But Jessica offered an entirely different portfolio. She brought an empire. Her family possessed the kind of generational wealth and elite social capital that Bradley and his pretentious status-obsessed parents had worshipped their entire lives. My thoughts immediately violently shifted to my in-laws Susan and Robert Jenkins. For 7 years I had endured their thinly veiled insults with silent grace. They never missed an opportunity to remind me of my humble working-class beginnings in a small Ohio factory town. Susan would sip expensive wine at country club dinners I had secretly paid for, loudly lamenting that Bradley had not married a woman with a proper pedigree. Robert would aggressively encourage his son to attend exclusive charity galas, specifically directing him to network with Jessica's father, the most powerful commercial developer in Columbus. They viewed my accounting career as respectable, but ultimately pedestrian. I was extremely useful for paying the mortgage, but I was never considered good enough to be featured prominently in their holiday family portraits. Everything made a terrifying sociopathic kind of sense now. Bradley did not just stumble into a random affair out of boredom. He had targeted Jessica precisely because of who her father was. But successfully seducing a real estate heiress required capital. It required expensive dinners, luxury hotel stays, imported gifts, and the flawless illusion of immense financial success. I was the human bankroll for his infidelity. I had literally financed his courtship of my own replacement. He drained my life savings using the money I earned through blood sweat and 60-hour work weeks to buy the luxury townhouse they were standing in right now. He had secured his golden ticket before dropping his dead weight. No wonder he had looked at Lily with such utter, unvarnished disgust in the delivery room. She was no longer part of his long-term financial strategy. She was a massive liability. In his mind, she was an anchor tying him to a working-class accountant threatening to derail his ascension into Jessica's elite world. That was why he staged the dramatic exit. That was why he manufactured the completely ridiculous cheating accusation in front of his brother. He desperately needed to invalidate my daughter so he could step cleanly into his role as the proud, dedicated father of a billionaire's grandson. He was creating a legal smokescreen to justify abandoning us without facing the social ruin he actually deserved. The puzzle pieces had snapped together to form a picture of unimaginable cruelty. I knew the who, the what, and the why. The financial mechanics of his betrayal were laid out clearly in my mind. But the sheer vast scale of the deception brought a new, chilling question bubbling to the surface. Tyler clearly knew everything. He had actively registered the fake LLC and personally facilitated the real estate purchase using my stolen funds. He had sat at my kitchen island and happily participated in the gaslighting. Bradley obviously knew exactly what he was doing every time he lied to my face. But what about Susan and Robert? Did my in-laws, the people who had hugged me at my baby shower and toasted to my safe delivery, know that their son was living a double life? Had they sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinner praising my pot roast, while knowing perfectly well that the grandchild they actually wanted, the one who would elevate their social standing, was growing in the womb of a wealthy heiress across town? The thought of that level of family-wide complicity made my blood run cold. It was one thing for a husband to be a lying, opportunistic cheat. It was an entirely different nightmare if his entire family had conspired to use me as a stepping stone. I looked in the rearview mirror, adjusting it to see my reflection. My eyes were completely dry. The naive, devoted wife who had entered the hospital 4 days ago was dead and gone. The woman sitting in this car was a senior auditor who had just uncovered the largest, most devastating fraud of her entire life. If Bradley's parents were innocent victims in his web of lies, I needed to warn them. But if they were co-conspirators, if they had actively helped him orchestrate my financial and emotional destruction to elevate their own social standing, then they were about to become primary targets in my investigation. I would not let them get away with throwing me out like garbage. I reached forward and turned the key in the ignition. The old engine roared to life, sounding loud and unrefined against the quiet, manicured streets of the gated community. I put the vehicle in drive and steered away from the luxury townhouse, leaving the traders behind their heavy oak doors. I was not going back to my empty house to cry over stolen nursery furniture. I was driving straight to the Jenkins family estate. I needed to look Susan and Robert in the eyes, and I needed to find out exactly how deep this rot actually went. The wrought iron gates of the Jenkins family estate loomed ahead of me, looking more like a fortress than a family home. I had driven this exact route countless times over the past 7 years, for Thanksgiving dinners and stuffy holiday brunches. Every previous trip was marked by my quiet anxiety, as I tried desperately to fit into a world of inherited wealth and country club gossip. I always felt like an outsider in their sprawling stone mansion, an ordinary accountant pretending to belong among the elite. But today, my hands were perfectly steady on the steering wheel. I parked my battered 12-year-old sedan at the base of their sweeping circular driveway. The massive house stood as a monument to everything Bradley valued more than his own flesh and blood. I took a deep breath, centering myself for the performance of a lifetime. I needed to know the absolute truth. If his parents were innocent victims in his web of lies, I would find out soon enough. But if they were actively involved in hiding my stolen money and erasing my daughter from their bloodline, I needed them to drop their guard completely. I reached for the rearview mirror and pinched my cheeks hard to bring out a flushed, blotchy color. I forced my mind to remember the agonizing emptiness of my daughter's stripped nursery. The tears came easily then. They were not tears of heartbreak, but tears of pure, blinding betrayal. I stepped out of the car, clutching my sleeping baby tight against my chest, and approached their massive mahogany front doors. I let my shoulders slump forward. I let my breathing become ragged and panicked. I rang the doorbell and waited for the trap to spring. Robert opened the door. He was wearing a crisp linen shirt and holding a leather-bound book, looking every inch the retired gentleman of leisure. His welcoming smile vanished the very second he saw my tear-stained face. I did not wait for an invitation to enter. I stumbled past him into the grand marble foyer, playing the part of the utterly destroyed wife to absolute perfection. I let out a loud, wretched sob that echoed off the high ceilings. "Bradley left me," I cried, my voice shaking violently. "He just walked out on us, Robert. He emptied our entire savings account. The $45,000 I saved for the baby is completely gone. And he took the nursery furniture. I have absolutely nothing left." I looked up at him, wide-eyed and pleading, acting exactly as naive and broken as they always assumed I was. Susan appeared at the top of the grand sweeping staircase. She hurried down her expensive silk robe, rustling against the marble steps. She did not rush forward to embrace me. She did not reach out to comfort her brand-new granddaughter, who was sleeping quietly in my arms. Instead, she stopped 3 feet away, her face settling into a tight, meticulously practiced mask of patronizing pity. She looked at me the way one might look at a stray dog that had wandered onto a pristine, manicured lawn. "Come into the sunroom, Chloe," Susan said, her tone dangerously calm and completely devoid of warmth. "Let us not shout in the foyer. The neighbors might hear." I followed them into the brightly lit sunroom, which was filled with expensive orchids and plush white furniture. I sat on the edge of a floral armchair, continuing to softly weep while rocking Lily. I begged them for help. I told them I did not understand why Bradley would suddenly accuse me of cheating. I played completely dumb about the corporate shell company and the luxury townhouse I had just staked out an hour ago. I needed them to feel vastly superior to me. Susan poured a cup of Earl Grey tea from a polished silver pot and slid it across the glass table toward me. "You need to calm down and be reasonable, Chloe," she said, taking a slow, elegant sip from her own cup. "Hysteria is not going to solve anything." I stared at her through my fake tears. "Reasonable," I choked out. "Susan, my husband just abandoned his child and drained my bank account. How can I possibly be reasonable right now?" Robert sighed heavily, crossing his arms over his chest. "Now, Chloe, we only have your side of the story," he said in his deep, authoritative voice. "Bradley called us earlier today. He is deeply distraught. He mentioned something about another man." I shook my head, frantically playing perfectly into their trap. "It is a lie," I wept loudly. "I have been working 60-hour weeks at the accounting firm just to pay our mortgage and keep his business afloat. You know exactly how hard I work for this family." Susan set her teacup down with a sharp clink that rang out in the quiet room. "And perhaps that is exactly the problem," she said, her voice dripping with absolute condescension. "You have always prioritized your career over your marriage. Bradley is a proud man, Chloe. He needs a wife who supports his ambitions socially, not a woman who treats her marriage like a corporate balance sheet. You are always at the office crunching numbers. You never attended the right charity galas with him. You made him feel entirely inadequate. You simply did not nurture him as a wife should. The audacity of her words was truly breathtaking. She was actually sitting in her multi-million-dollar home blaming me for being robbed by her son because I worked too many hours to pay her son's bills. It took every single ounce of my professional willpower not to scream the truth right in her face. I wanted to tell her I knew all about Jessica. I wanted to throw the downloaded bank statements onto her expensive glass table. But a seasoned auditor never reveals their hand during the initial discovery phase. Instead, I buried my face in my hands and let out a broken, pathetic wail. "I am so sorry," I sobbed, rocking back and forth. "I just wanted to provide for us. Please, Susan, you have to help me fix this." Susan exchanged a long, heavy look with Robert. It was the specific kind of silent communication shared only by people who shared deep, ugly secrets. She stood up, smoothing the front of her silk robe with manicured hands. "Stay here and drink your tea, Chloe," she instructed, treating me exactly like a reprimanded toddler. "I am going to call Bradley. We will attempt to get to the bottom of this mess, but you need to prepare yourself for the harsh reality that some marriages simply cannot be repaired once trust is broken." Robert followed her out of the sunroom, pulling the heavy double doors shut behind them to ensure I remained isolated. The second the brass latch clicked into place, my tears stopped instantly. The weeping, broken wife evaporated like mist on a hot mirror. I sat up perfectly straight. My breathing slowed, returning to a calm, calculated rhythm. I looked down at Lily, who was still sleeping soundly in her carrier. I gently placed the carrier on the center of the plush armchair, making sure she was completely secure. I stood up and wiped the fake moisture from my cheeks. I did not even look at the tea. The house was enormous, but the acoustics of the marble hallways carried sound perfectly if you knew exactly how to listen. I took off my shoes, leaving them quietly by the floral sofa. In my bare feet, I moved silently across the room. I slowly turned the brass handle of the sunroom doors, opening one just a fraction of an inch to avoid making any noise. I slipped through the narrow gap and stepped into the long, shadowed hallway. I could hear the faint, muffled murmur of Susan's voice coming from Robert's private study down the corridor. I crept down the hall, pressing my back against the cool, expensive wallpaper, moving closer and closer to the slightly ajar door of the study. I pulled out my smartphone and hit the record button. I had played their twisted game perfectly. Now I was going to find out exactly how much they really knew. The polished hardwood floor was cold against my bare feet as I pressed my spine into the expensive silk wallpaper lining the corridor. My lungs barely moved, afraid that even the sound of my own breath would betray my presence. I held my smartphone directly near the narrow opening of Robert's private study, tapping the bright red record icon on the screen. The digital timer began to count the seconds, silently marking the beginning of their downfall. Inside the room, the heavy silence was shattered by the sharp clinking of crystal as Robert poured himself a drink. Then Susan's voice drifted through the gap, completely stripped of the fake sympathetic warmth she had just used on me in the sunroom. "She is falling for it perfectly." "Robert," Susan said, her tone brisk and entirely clinical. "She is an emotional wreck. We need to maintain this narrative and keep her completely pacified until the divorce paperwork is expedited and finalized. If she gets suspicious and decides to make a public scene, it will be an absolute catastrophe for this family." Robert sighed, a heavy, ragged sound of a man trying to manage a highly volatile investment portfolio. "I do not like this. Susan," he muttered, his leather shoes squeaking against the floorboards as he paced. "Bradley is playing a very dangerous game. If she hires a forensic accountant and starts digging into the business accounts, we are all going to be exposed." "She cannot afford a forensic accountant," Susan snapped back with a cold, sharp laugh. "That is the entire point of what Tyler did. Tyler secured the cash exactly as planned." Susan continued, her voice echoing slightly in the large vaulted study. "He moved the $45,000 into the LLC and closed on the townhouse yesterday. Horizon Zenith is virtually untraceable to a standard family court judge. By the time Chloe even figures out how to file a financial discovery motion, she will be drowning in overdue mortgage payments and utility bills. We are going to starve her out, Robert. If she has no financial resources to fight, she will be forced to accept a rapid, quiet settlement just to survive." I closed my eyes tight as the sheer magnitude of their cruelty washed over me. "Starve me out. They were actively weaponizing my poverty. They were deliberately orchestrating my financial ruin, not out of spite, but as a highly calculated business strategy. But Robert was still pacing. "What if Jessica's father finds out about the baby?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave in sheer panic. "If Richard discovers that Bradley abandoned a newborn daughter to run off with Jessica, he will slaughter us in the boardroom. He will cancel the entire commercial real estate merger. That merger is supposed to save this family, Susan. If we lose the commercial partnership with his firm, our brokerage will be bankrupt by the end of the fiscal year. We are over-leveraged on 3 different downtown properties. We need Richard's capital." Susan interrupted him with an aggressive, confident hiss. "Richard is not going to find out. Bradley has assured Jessica that Chloe was simply a brief mistake that ended months ago. Jessica believes the divorce is already well underway. Richard is preparing to name Bradley as a senior vice president in his development firm the moment the ink dries on his marriage certificate to Jessica. This merger guarantees our family generational wealth and unshakable status in this city. We are not going to let a working-class payroll clerk ruin the greatest financial elevation the Jenkins family has ever seen." The digital timer on my phone hit 3 minutes. Every single word was being captured in crystal-clear, high-definition audio. The puzzle was finally complete, and the picture it formed was absolutely grotesque. They were deliberately bankrupting me to secure a multi-million-dollar corporate merger with Jessica's father. My entire life had been dismantled simply to facilitate a real estate acquisition. "What about the child?" Robert asked, his voice wavering slightly. "What about Lily?" "She is still Bradley's biological daughter." "Do not be sentimental," Susan snapped harshly, her tone completely devoid of any maternal instinct. "That child is nothing but an anchor. She is a working-class mistake that ties Bradley to a life of mediocrity. I have already contacted the estate attorneys. We are restructuring the Jenkins family trust tomorrow morning. Every single asset, every stock portfolio, and every piece of commercial property is being redirected to Jessica's newborn son. He is the true heir. He is the child who bridges the gap between our struggling brokerage and a billion-dollar real estate empire. Chloe's little mistake will not see a single dime of our money. We will offer a meager basic child support settlement and wash our hands of them completely." I stood in the shadowed hallway staring blankly at the ornate crown molding on the ceiling. The cold, heavy truth settled deep into my bones. They were trying to starve me out to protect a corporate buyout. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect financial sabotage. They had seized my liquid assets, isolated me from my support system, and planned to starve me into total legal submission. They truly believed that taking my savings account would render me entirely powerless. They assumed that a woman without a massive bank balance was a woman without teeth, but they failed to calculate the most crucial variable in their entire arrogant scheme. I did not need their wealth to destroy them. I had spent my entire professional adult life learning how to dismantle corrupt organizations from the inside out. I knew how to read dense tax codes, how to report fraudulent shell companies to the federal government, and how to unravel complex financial crimes. I possessed the exact forensic skill set required to absolutely obliterate their impending merger and send both Tyler and Bradley to federal prison for wire fraud and asset concealment. I listened for another minute as Susan and Robert began discussing the upcoming country club charity gala and what they were going to wear to impress Jessica's father. The casual, effortless shift in their conversation from destroying my life to choosing expensive evening wear was physically sickening. I reached down and tapped the red square on my phone screen, saving the audio file, and instantly uploading it to multiple secure cloud servers. I backed away from the study door, moving with the silent, careful grace of a ghost. I slipped back through the narrow opening of the sunroom doors and quietly pulled them shut. I padded across the plush white carpet, slipped my sensible shoes back onto my feet, and sat down in the floral armchair next to my sleeping daughter. I picked up the lukewarm cup of Earl Grey tea and took a slow, deliberate sip. The flavor was bitter, but it tasted exactly like impending victory. When Suzanne and Robert finally returned to the sunroom 5 minutes later, wearing their carefully constructed masks of sympathetic sorrow, I looked up at them with wide, red-rimmed eyes. Susan gently patted my shoulder and told me that Bradley was simply too emotional to speak right now, but that they would handle everything for me. I thanked her profusely, playing the role of the gullible, grateful victim one last time. I promised them I would go home and wait quietly for their guidance. I watched them exchange a smug, victorious glance. They thought they had won. They thought the financial siege was working flawlessly. They had absolutely no idea that I had just armed the nuclear warhead that would level their entire fraudulent empire to ash. The morning sun washed over the hardwood floors of my living room, but the house felt entirely devoid of warmth. I had barely slept after returning from my in-laws' sprawling estate. My mind had been racing, cataloging every vile word Susan and Robert had spoken in that study. I sat at the kitchen island, sipping a cup of black coffee, staring at the empty hallway that led to what used to be my daughter's nursery. Lily was asleep in her bassinet next to me, oblivious to the fact that her entire paternal bloodline was actively conspiring to erase her from existence. I knew Bradley would have to make his next move soon. He needed to establish a legal narrative to justify his abrupt departure and secure his flawless reputation before his impending marriage to Jessica. I did not have to wait long. Just before noon, the familiar low rumble of a heavy diesel engine vibrated through the front windows. I did not need to look outside to know it was Tyler's custom black truck. I stood up, smoothing my shirt and bracing myself for the performance I was about to give. The front door unlocked and swung open with an aggressive thud. Bradley marched into the house, followed closely by his older brother. They moved with the arrogant swagger of men who believed they held all the cards. Bradley did not even glance toward the bassinet where his 5-day-old daughter was sleeping. His eyes were locked entirely on me, burning with a manufactured, righteous fury. He walked straight into the kitchen and violently slammed a thick manila envelope onto the granite countertop. The sharp smack of paper against stone echoed loudly in the quiet house. He pointed a shaking finger at the envelope, his chest heaving, as he put on a masterclass in theatrical heartbreak. He commanded me to open it. He told me to read exactly what kind of manipulative, lying woman I truly was. I kept my expression perfectly carefully neutral. I reached forward with steady hands and pulled a single sheet of paper from the unsealed envelope. The document featured a brightly colored generic logo at the top belonging to a private, obscure medical testing clinic located 3 towns over. It was not a facility associated with our hospital, or my obstetrician. It was a mail-in storefront operation that advertised fast, discreet results. I scanned down to the bold text at the bottom of the page. The finding was printed in stark black ink, declaring a 0% probability of paternity. According to this piece of paper, Bradley was absolutely definitively not the father of my child. I stared at the document, letting the sheer audacity of the lie wash over me. I knew with absolute biological certainty that Bradley was the only man I had been with. There was no coworker from a downtown hotel. There was no secret affair. Lily was his daughter. But looking at the cheap printed logo of the clinic, the puzzle pieces of their corporate conspiracy snapped together with blinding clarity. This was not just a forged document. This was a purchased service. My forensic accounting brain instantly connected the dots. A shady, unverified medical clinic operating on the edge of town would easily fabricate a test result for the right price. And I knew exactly who had the liquid capital to pay that price. Tyler. The $45,000 they had stolen from my savings account was not just for the luxury townhouse down payment. They had used a portion of my own hard-earned money to buy a fraudulent legal document meant to completely sever Bradley's financial and moral obligations to his own child. Bradley stepped closer, leaning over the counter. His face twisted in a mask of sheer disgust. He told me the game was completely over. He announced that he was officially filing for an at-fault divorce immediately. He stated that he would be submitting this paternity test to the family court judge to prove that I had committed marital fraud. But he did not stop there. The greed and arrogance of his plan knew no bounds. He demanded full reimbursement for what he called his wasted time and emotional distress. He told me he expected me to cover all the hospital bills, the remaining mortgage on this house, and return every dime he had supposedly invested in our marriage. He was trying to legally bankrupt me while playing the victim. He needed this piece of paper to show Jessica's billionaire father that he was a tragically wronged man, escaping a deceitful wife. This 0% probability result was his shield. It protected his lucrative commercial real estate merger and guaranteed that my daughter would never be able to claim a single penny of the Jenkins family trust fund I had heard Susan plotting to restructure. Tyler stood leaning against the doorframe, watching me with a sickeningly smug grin. He clearly expected me to collapse to the floor, weeping and begging for forgiveness. He expected me to shatter under the weight of this irrefutable, undeniable evidence. Instead, I slowly placed the fraudulent document back onto the granite counter. I did not scream. I did not defend my honor. I knew that arguing with sociopaths was a complete waste of breath. I needed them to leave this piece of paper exactly where it was. This forged document was no longer their weapon against me. It was now a critical piece of physical evidence in my growing arsenal. I looked up at Bradley, letting a few silent tears well in my eyes, playing the role of the defeated, cornered wife. I told him I did not understand how this was possible. I let my voice tremble just enough to sound completely pathetic and broken. I asked him what I was supposed to do now. Bradley sneered, adjusting his expensive watch. He told me that was entirely my problem to figure out. He warned me not to contact his family or his brokerage ever again. He stated his attorney would be in touch with the formal divorce filings, and that I had better not try to fight him in court, because this test result would absolutely destroy me in front of a judge. He turned around and walked out the door without looking back. Tyler let out a short, mocking laugh before following his brother out into the bright morning air. The heavy door clicked shut behind them. I stood in the kitchen listening to the diesel engine of the truck roar to life and fade away down the street. The moment the sound vanished, I wiped the fake tears from my face. My heart was completely calm. My mind was razor sharp. I reached down and picked up the fake paternity test, holding it up to the light. They thought they had backed me into a corner and sealed my fate. They thought they had successfully erased me and my daughter from their wealthy, perfect future. But they had just handed a seasoned forensic auditor the exact thread needed to unravel their entire criminal conspiracy. They had committed blatant medical and legal fraud, and they had paid for it using a corporate shell company holding my stolen funds. I walked over to my laptop and opened a new encrypted digital file. The crying was over. It was time to completely dismantle the Jenkins family empire. The courier arrived on a Tuesday afternoon during a torrential downpour that mirrored the chaotic storm brewing inside my own life. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and trying to soothe a fussy Lily, when a series of sharp, loud knocks rattled the front door. I pulled my plush robe tighter around my recovering body and walked down the hallway. The delivery man standing on the wet porch handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with heavy red tamper-proof tape. The return address, printed in an intimidating gold-embossed font, belonged to one of the most ruthless, high-priced family law firms in downtown Columbus. My hands trembled slightly as I signed the digital receipt and closed the heavy oak door. I already knew exactly what kind of poison was waiting for me inside. I laid Lily back in her comfortable bassinet and grabbed a silver letter opener from the desk drawer. The thick stack of crisp legal documents slid onto the granite counter with a heavy, definitive thud. It was a formal petition for the dissolution of our marriage, accompanied by a completely drafted settlement agreement. Bradley and his high-powered, expensive attorney had wasted absolutely no time. They had weaponized that fraudulent fake paternity test to construct an absolute legal slaughter. I began reading through the dense, intimidating legalese my professional accounting background, allowing me to easily translate their ruthless demands without needing a dictionary. The sheer audacity of the proposed settlement was truly breathtaking to witness. According to the printed documents, Bradley generously offered to let me keep my battered 12-year-old Honda Civic. In exchange, I was expected to surrender all legal claims to our marital home. He wanted the house, the accumulated equity, and every single piece of shared property we had acquired over the last 3 years of our supposedly happy marriage. But the most devastating section was buried deep on page 14 of the petition. Citing the fabricated lab results as undeniable proof of marital fraud and paternity deception, Bradley demanded absolute absolution from any and all child support obligations. He was legally classifying Lily as a complete biological stranger. The document boldly stated that my supposed infidelity nullified any financial responsibility on his part. He was attempting to leave a recovering postpartum mother and a newborn infant completely destitute, while he waltzed off to merge his life with a billionaire heiress. As I was staring at the signature line demanding my immediate surrender, my cell phone chimed loudly from across the kitchen island. The screen illuminated with a direct text message from Bradley. I picked it up, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The message was short and dripping with absolute calculated malice. "I suggest you sign the papers." "Chloe," it read, "if you try to fight me in court, I will release that paternity test to everyone. I will drag your name through the mud until your reputation is completely destroyed. Nobody hires a lying, cheating accountant. You will lose your job, your license, and everything else. Just sign it and walk away, or I will ruin you." The room seemed to spin, out of control. A cold, heavy dread settled into the very pit of my stomach. Bradley was not just threatening my current financial stability, he was threatening my entire professional future and my ability to survive. In the conservative, strict world of corporate finance, a flawless reputation is absolutely everything. If he publicly branded me as a fraud and a liar, my prestigious firm would inevitably distance themselves to avoid a scandal. I would lose my salary, my health insurance, and my only ability to provide a safe life for Lily. He had perfectly calculated my greatest vulnerability. He knew I was terrified of losing the career I had worked so incredibly hard to build from the ground up. I slumped into the nearest kitchen chair, pulling my knees toward my chest as panic threatened to completely overtake my rational mind. For a fleeting, terrifying second, the immense weight of their coordinated conspiracy threatened to crush me. I was just a working-class woman from a small Ohio factory town. Bradley was backed by the endless resources of the Jenkins family, and soon he would have the limitless wealth of Jessica's billionaire father at his disposal. If I walked into a family courtroom and blindly shouted that the test was a fake, his expensive, elite lawyers would simply bury me in endless, complex litigation. They would stall, delay, and file motion after motion until I ran out of money and was forced into a desperate surrender. They had the capital to play a long, brutal game of legal attrition that I could never hope to afford. But as I looked over at my innocent daughter sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, a profound, permanent shift occurred in my mind. The initial suffocating panic began to harden into something olive sharp and unbreakable. They thought I was trapped. They thought they had effectively cornered a frightened, naive mouse. But they forgot that I had spent my entire adult life analyzing risk, identifying critical vulnerabilities, and dismantling complex, corrupt corporate structures. They had built their entire assault on a fragile foundation of lies, forged documents, and stolen money. They assumed their extreme wealth made them utterly invincible. But wealth does not make you bulletproof if the entire foundation is rotting from the inside out. I picked up the predatory settlement agreement and tossed it casually onto the kitchen counter. I was not going to sign a single page of their fraudulent, outrageous demands, and I was certainly not going to let a spoiled, arrogant real estate broker intimidate me into poverty and submission. If Bradley and his vicious family wanted to play a high-stakes game of corporate destruction, I was more than willing to oblige them. But I would not fight him on his terms. I would not walk into a rigged family court, unprepared and underfunded. I needed a brilliant strategy that bypassed his expensive defense lawyers entirely. I needed to strike where it would inflict the absolute maximum amount of damage to his carefully constructed new life. I needed to fight fire with fire. I grabbed my laptop and opened the secure encrypted folder containing the secret audio recording of his parents confessing to the entire trust fund plot. I looked at the commercial routing numbers from the fake LLC his brother Tyler had registered to steal my life savings. They wanted to fight dirty. They wanted to burn my life to the ground to protect their precious commercial merger and their elevated social status. I wiped a single stray tear from my cheek and opened a new blank digital document. I was going to fight their fire with a devastating, uncontrollable inferno. The morning after Bradley delivered his predatory ultimatum, I woke up before the sun rose. The house was completely quiet, save for the soft, delicate cooing of Lily sleeping in her bassinet. I poured a strong cup of black coffee and sat at my kitchen island. I currently had exactly 42 solitary cents to my name. Bradley believed this starvation would force my surrender. He assumed poverty would paralyze my ability to retain counsel. But he had vastly underestimated the power of an immaculate financial history. For the past 7 years, I had meticulously managed our household income, keeping our debt ratio perfectly balanced. That extreme diligence belonged entirely to me. I purposefully dressed in my sharpest navy business suit, fed my innocent daughter, and drove straight to a prominent commercial credit union. I did not walk in asking for a temporary lifeline. I sat across the desk from a sympathetic loan officer, presented my flawless employment record, and requested a $50,000 personal loan. The interest rate they offered was exorbitant, but I did not blink. I signed the massive stack of paperwork with a perfectly steady hand. This was not a burdensome debt to me. It was an absolute essential investment in my total vindication. With funds secured, my next objective was finding the perfect weapon. I did not want a gentle mediator. I was actively hunting for a merciless legal predator who understood how to dismantle corrupt dynasties. I spent hours analyzing public dockets, searching for family law cases involving wealthy developers. I wanted the one highly specific lawyer who routinely made arrogant men like Robert Jenkins financially bleed in open court. I found her. Her name was Evelyn Vance. She was a senior partner known as a merciless shark. She possessed a deep disdain for the Jenkins family after Robert swindled one of her clients a decade ago. Evelyn engaged in psychological warfare. I wired her $10,000 retainer fee before I stepped inside her building. When you are preparing to entirely destroy a wealthy, arrogant dynasty, you do not ever haggle over the price of the explosive. The following afternoon, I confidently walked directly into Evelyn Vance's immaculate corner office. She was a formidable woman with sharp, piercing eyes and an aura of absolute authority. She offered absolutely no empty, sympathetic platitudes regarding my completely shattered marriage. She sat behind her desk and instructed me to lay out the board. I did not cry. I did not speak about my shattered heart or my ruined dreams. I handed her the financial dossier I had compiled. I carefully slid the fraudulent fabricated paternity test across the polished wood, followed closely by the verified registry documents proving Tyler created the Horizon Zenith Shell Company. Next came the property deed proving my stolen $45,000 funded the luxury townhouse down payment. Finally, I placed a flash drive on her desk containing the audio recording of Susan and Robert plotting to starve me out and divert the family trust to Jessica's newborn son. Evelyn listened to the entire recording. The silence in the office was heavy as Susan's cruel words echoed. When the recording finally ended, Evelyn slowly leaned back in her chair. A slow, razor-sharp, brilliant smile instantly spread across her face. Evelyn looked directly at me and stated that Bradley had essentially handed us a fully loaded weapon and pointed it directly at his own head. We thoroughly discussed his absurd, arrogant demand for full financial reimbursement and his vicious threat to destroy my professional reputation at my accounting firm. Evelyn assured me with absolute chilling certainty that by the time we were finished, Bradley would be the one begging for mercy. She explained that our very first strike would be entirely silent and invisible. We were not going to argue with him or his expensive lawyers about the ridiculous mail and paternity test. Instead, Evelyn immediately drafted an ex parte petition to the family court, demanding a state-mandated court-supervised DNA test. We would bypass his shady, obscure private clinic entirely, and legally force him to submit his genetic material under the strict, watchful eye of a government official. Once the state laboratory inevitably confirmed he was Lily's biological father, his fraudulent document would immediately transform into a massive criminal liability. He would be trapped in a deliberate perjury charge before the divorce proceedings even officially began. As Evelyn meticulously outlined our exceptionally aggressive strategy for seizing the stolen luxury townhouse and permanently freezing the Horizon Zenith corporate accounts, I finally felt a profound wave of true relief wash entirely over me. I finally had an unparalleled legal heavyweight standing firmly and fiercely in my corner. Evelyn possessed the incredible power to strictly secure my immediate financial future and ensure Lily received every single solitary dime she was rightfully owed. But as I looked out the large window at the bustling city below, a dark, cold realization settled deep over me. Winning a favorable divorce settlement was simply no longer enough to balance the scales. Forcing Bradley to pay standard child support would not truly hurt him. If he still managed to walk away with Jessica and her father's billionaire real estate empire, he would simply view my financial penalty as the mundane cost of doing business. His parents would still secure their massive corporate merger. They would still elevate their social standing to the elite level they craved. They would still believe they had successfully discarded me like useless trash. To truly achieve permanent justice, I could not simply just win a basic victory in a quiet family courtroom. I absolutely needed to completely annihilate the very foundation of their promised golden future. I had the legal backing to secure my personal assets now, but I desperately needed undeniable financial leverage to completely detonate the impending commercial merger. I needed to show Jessica's extremely powerful father exactly what kind of parasitic monsters he was inviting into his family. The certified envelope from the state laboratory arrived via registered mail exactly 14 days after my attorney filed the court mandate. Unlike the cheap, generic printout Bradley had dramatically slapped onto my kitchen counter, this heavy document bore the official embossed seal of the Ohio Department of Health. I sat alone at my dining table running my thumb over the thick paper. I did not need to open it to know the truth, but the legal confirmation was a crucial piece of artillery. I carefully sliced the flap open and pulled out the crisp white pages. There it was, printed in bold, undeniable black ink. A 99.9% probability of paternity. Bradley was officially, scientifically, and legally the father of my sweet daughter Lily. I immediately drove down to Evelyn's downtown office and placed the official results directly onto her expansive glass desk. She smiled that same terrifying predator smile I had grown to deeply appreciate. She told me we were not going to mail a copy to Bradley. We were certainly not going to call his sleazy lawyer and gloat about our victory. Evelyn filed the results under a strict judicial seal. We would let them continue to build their entire legal defense and their precious corporate merger on the arrogant assumption that their forged clinic paper was actually going to save them. A lie is a remarkably fragile structure. The higher they built their tower of deception, the harder the entire foundation would crumble when we finally pulled the support beams away. The family court ambush was officially primed, but my personal mission was far from complete. I needed to ensure that Bradley and his brother Tyler faced consequences far beyond a simple divorce settlement. I returned home, put Lily down for her afternoon nap, and brewed a fresh pot of incredibly strong coffee. I sat down at my laptop and pulled up the master financial ledgers for Bradley's real estate brokerage. For years, I had meticulously filed their joint tax returns out of a misplaced sense of wifely duty. I had completely trusted the profit and loss statements Bradley handed me at the end of every fiscal quarter. Now I was viewing those exact same ledgers not as a devoted, supportive spouse, but as a highly trained, certified public accountant, actively hunting for financial anomalies. I started by cross-referencing the transaction history from our joint consumer savings account with the corporate expense reports he had claimed over the past 36 months. The $45,000 they stole from me had been wired to Horizon Zenith, the fraudulent shell company Tyler had registered to purchase the luxury townhouse. But I needed to know exactly how they classified that transfer on the business end to avoid triggering a massive red flag with the bank. You cannot simply move that kind of capital between entities without leaving a distinct paper trail. I dug deep into the vendor payout logs, analyzing layers of digital receipts and obscure vendor codes. It took me 6 hours of grueling, relentless auditing to finally uncover the rotting core of their operation. Bradley had not just stolen my personal savings to fund his new life. He had actively engaged in blatant aggressive tax evasion. He had been intentionally misclassifying his commission payouts for the past 2 years, routing a massive percentage of his unreported income directly into our joint savings to hide it from the Internal Revenue Service. Then he had the absolute audacity to write off the $45,000 wire transfer to Tyler's shell company as a deductible corporate consulting expense. The sheer immense stupidity of his arrogance left me breathless in the quiet glow of my computer screen. He was double-dipping in the most illegal way possible. He was actively hiding his income to avoid paying federal taxes and then faking business expenses to artificially lower his corporate tax bracket. The money used to buy the luxury townhouse for his billionaire heiress mistress was entirely untaxed dirty capital. As a licensed professional, I knew exactly what the federal penalties were for intentional tax fraud and corporate asset concealment. We were no longer talking about a civil dispute over alimony in a local family court. We were talking about severe federal crimes carrying massive financial fines and mandatory prison sentences. Bradley and Tyler had essentially handed me the matches and the gasoline needed to burn their entire false reality to the ground. My mind raced as I downloaded the compiled evidence onto a secure, encrypted flash drive. Bradley actually thought his biggest problem was navigating a messy divorce, while keeping his wealthy new fiancée completely in the dark. He had absolutely no idea that he was currently standing directly on a federal landmine. The entire Jenkins family was relying heavily on the upcoming commercial merger with Jessica's father to save their over-leveraged failing brokerage. A billionaire real estate magnate does not merge his pristine corporate empire with a man actively under investigation by the federal government for tax evasion and wire fraud. I closed my laptop and looked out the living room window at the quiet suburban street. The raw, blinding anger that had been threatening to completely consume me for weeks had finally refined into a cold, calculated precision. I possessed the undeniable biological proof that Bradley had abandoned his newborn daughter. I held the verified financial documentation proving his entire real estate operation was a fraudulent criminal enterprise. I had the exact leverage required to protect my daughter, secure my assets, and utterly destroy the men who thought they could casually throw us away like garbage. I had assembled the perfect weapon. Now I simply needed the perfect battlefield to detonate it. I needed an audience. I needed to look Jessica's powerful father directly in the eye and hand him the true measure of the man his daughter was about to marry. The most dangerous weapon a woman can wield against an arrogant man is his own unchecked ego. I knew that if I fought back immediately, Bradley and his powerful family would instantly raise their defenses. They would deploy their expensive legal team, hide their assets deeper, and brace for a prolonged war. I could not afford to let them see my true strength. I needed them blind. I needed them completely intoxicated by their own perceived victory. To destroy a fortress, you do not batter the front gates while the guards are watching. You convince the guards that the war is over, so they leave the gates wide open. I sat at my kitchen counter and pulled my cell phone toward me. My fingers hovered over the screen as I prepared to swallow every single ounce of my pride. The text message I drafted to Bradley was a masterpiece of manufactured despair. I kept the sentences short, fractured, and entirely devoid of my usual articulate professionalism. I typed the words slowly, forcing myself to channel the terrified broken woman they all desperately wanted me to be. "You win, Bradley." I typed out my thumb, deliberately hitting the send button. "I am completely exhausted. I have no money left to fight you. I am taking Lily and leaving the house today. Send the final settlement papers to my email. I will review them and sign. I just want this nightmare to be over." I placed the phone face down on the cool granite and waited. The response was almost instantaneous. My screen lit up with his reply, validating exactly how predictable his narcissism truly was. "Smart choice, Chloe." The message read, "Do not make this harder than it has to be. Leave the house keys on the counter. Tyler will swing by tomorrow to verify the property is empty." A cold, dark smile spread across my face. They had swallowed the bait whole. I moved through the house with absolute surgical precision. I did not pack a single piece of jewelry, clothing, or furniture that the Jenkins family had ever purchased for me. I wanted no trace of their tainted wealth coming with me into my new life. I packed only my premarital sensible accounting clothes, my reliable laptop, my encrypted flash drives, and the basic essentials Lily needed to survive. I loaded my battered 12-year-old Honda Civic, until the suspension groaned under the weight of our meager belongings. I strapped my sleeping infant into her car seat, took one final look at the sprawling suburban house that had been built on a foundation of lies, and walked out the front door without shedding a single tear. I dropped the heavy brass keys onto the kitchen island, right next to the empty envelope that had once held their fake paternity test. I did not drive to a comfortable hotel or seek refuge with sympathetic friends. I needed a location that would perfectly sell my performance of absolute destitution. I drove straight to the far industrial edges of Columbus and signed a month-to-month lease on a cramped run-down 2-bedroom apartment. The building was a depressing, faded brick structure surrounded by cracked asphalt and harsh, buzzing streetlights. The carpets inside the unit were thin and smelled faintly of old smoke. The radiator in the corner sputtered and hissed a constant metallic rhythm. It was a bleak, depressing environment, but to me, it was the perfect tactical bunker. The physical illusion of my poverty was the final crucial step in dismantling their guard. I knew Bradley would never bother to check on me himself, but he would absolutely send his brother to gloat. The very next afternoon, a loud, aggressive knock rattled my thin apartment door. I peered through the scratched peephole and saw Tyler standing in the dimly lit hallway. He was wearing an expensive, tailored suit, looking wildly out of place in the dingy corridor. I pinched my cheeks to make them look flushed and distressed before slowly turning the deadbolt. Tyler pushed his way inside without waiting for an invitation. He held a thick manila folder containing the hard copies of the predatory divorce settlement. He stopped in the middle of the cramped living room, looking around at the bare walls, the cheap second-hand bassinet, and the stained carpets. A look of profound, absolute disgust crossed his features, followed immediately by a smug, victorious smirk.
"Wow, Chloe,"
Tyler said, shaking his head with a harsh, mocking laugh. "You really hit rock bottom fast. Bradley told me you were giving up, but I had to see this miserable place for myself. This is exactly where someone like you belongs." I looked down at the floor, letting my shoulders slump forward perfectly, playing the role of a crushed, defeated victim. I reached out with a trembling hand and took the legal folder from his grasp. I whispered a pathetic thank you and told him I just needed a few days to read through the horrible terms before signing my life away. Tyler did not even bother to argue. He was too busy soaking in the grim, depressing atmosphere of my new reality. He confidently assured me that I had made the right choice, because fighting the Jenkins family would have ended with me sleeping on the actual street. He turned and walked out, leaving the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the musty air. The moment the lock clicked shut behind him, the trembling in my hands vanished completely. My posture straightened, and my pathetic facade evaporated into the quiet room. Tyler's visit was the absolute confirmation I needed. The Jenkins family had entirely dropped their guard. Their staggering arrogance had made them incredibly dangerously sloppy. They truly believed they had won. Over the next few days, I monitored the situation silently. Through mutual industry contacts, I heard the rumors swirling around the downtown financial district. Bradley was openly celebrating his impending freedom. He was carelessly bragging at expensive steakhouses about how easily he had disposed of his problematic wife. Susan and Robert were aggressively moving forward with the massive commercial merger, viewing my swift exit as the final green light. They were deeply, deeply convinced that my silence and my cheap apartment meant I was too weak, too terrified, and far too poor to ever retaliate. They assumed a woman living in a faded brick building on the wrong side of the city possessed no power to hurt them. They failed to realize that while they were busy picking out designer outfits for their upcoming corporate galas, I was sitting at a folding table in my dingy kitchen holding a court-ordered DNA test and a mountain of federal tax evasion evidence. I was quietly collaborating with the most ruthless family law attorney in the state. I was not hiding in this apartment because I was broken. I was hiding here because I was patiently, meticulously waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike. They thought they had buried me in the dirt, but they did not know I was a seed quietly preparing to break the ground and tear their entire world apart. The damp walls of my cheap industrial apartment were supposed to be my silent tomb. That was what Bradley and his arrogant family truly believed as they toasted their expensive champagne glasses in their sprawling suburban estates. I could almost picture them laughing at my expense, completely convinced that my sudden withdrawal equated to total surrender. They thought I was spending my days weeping over a broken marriage and my nights shivering in the cold. But my tiny, dingy living room was not a place of mourning or defeat. It had transformed into a highly efficient command center. While they were busy patting themselves on the back for orchestrating the perfect crime, I was methodically setting the invisible charges that would blow their entire reality to pieces. Evelyn Vance operated with the silent, lethal efficiency of a great white shark hunting in dark waters. She did not waste precious time with angry phone calls or dramatic legal posturing that would simply alert the enemy to our movements. Instead, she utilized the quiet, unyielding power of the judicial system to strike from below. Because Bradley had brazenly submitted that fabricated paternity test to the court as part of his initial divorce petition, he had inadvertently opened the door for a massive forensic counteroffensive. Evelyn filed an emergency ex parte motion demanding a full, transparent financial disclosure of all marital assets under the penalty of perjury. But she did not stop there. Using the specific commercial routing numbers I had secretly pulled from our joint savings account, she issued a direct binding legal subpoena for the private banking records of Horizon Zenith. That was the mysterious shell company his older brother Tyler had so confidently created. Since Tyler was not technically a party to our divorce proceedings, he assumed his little corporate entity was completely immune to any family court scrutiny. He was dead wrong. The highly classified financial records arrived at Evelyn's pristine downtown office on a rainy Thursday morning. We sat side by side at her massive mahogany conference table, spreading the heavily redacted bank statements out like pieces of a complex criminal jigsaw puzzle. It did not take my trained accounting eyes long to find the exact anomaly we were hunting for. The paper trail they had left behind was so incredibly arrogant and sloppy, it almost felt like a direct insult to my entire profession. I tracked the exact sum of $45,000 line by line. I watched the money move from my hard-earned consumer savings account directly into the primary operating fund for Horizon Zenith. From there, the stolen funds rested for exactly 48 hours before being wired to a prominent local escrow company. The official memo line on the final wire transfer was the absolute, undeniable smoking gun. It clearly stated that the money was the initial cash down payment for a luxury townhouse located in the most exclusive zip code in Columbus. The primary resident legally listed on the property deed was Jessica. I traced the printed numbers on the paper with my index finger, feeling a cold, righteous fury settle deep into my chest. Bradley had not just stolen my money to buy his mistress a secret love nest. He had actively used the funds meant to feed and clothe his own newborn daughter to finance his shiny new life with a billionaire heiress. He had literally taken the roof from over Lily's head to purchase premium luxury real estate for another woman. And Tyler had willingly facilitated the entire fraudulent transaction, acting as the corporate shield to hide his brother's despicable infidelity. The paper trail was absolutely ironclad. We had them dead to rights on severe asset concealment, marital fraud, and wire fraud. The local family court judge would completely destroy Bradley's financial standing. But as I looked at the undeniable proof of their boundless greed, I knew that a simple courtroom victory was no longer sufficient. Evelyn leaned back in her leather chair, folding her manicured hands together. She told me we had more than enough ammunition to completely strip Bradley of every single asset he owned. She asked me how I wanted to deliver the fatal blow. I closed my eyes and pictured the condescending smirk on Susan's face when she told me I was nothing but a working-class mistake. I remembered Robert's absolute panic over losing the massive commercial real estate merger with Jessica's father. A quiet, legal settlement mediated behind closed mahogany doors would not inflict the kind of generational damage they deserved. I needed an audience that actually mattered to them. I needed to expose them to the exact powerful people they were trying so desperately to impress. The answer arrived later that very evening in the form of a digital society newsletter forwarded to me by a sympathetic former coworker. I sat on my lumpy, second-hand sofa, reading the bold, glamorous headline, illuminating my laptop screen. The Jenkins family, in conjunction with Richard Holdings, was hosting a massive high society charity gala at the most prestigious private country club in the state. The event was being officially billed as a philanthropic endeavor for local hospitals, but everyone in the downtown financial district knew exactly what it really was. It was a glorified, lavish engagement party and a highly public celebration of the impending corporate merger between Bradley's failing brokerage and Jessica's father's billionaire empire. The elite guest list included the wealthiest developers, the most influential politicians, and the absolute top tier of Ohio high society. It was the absolute perfect target. Bradley and his parents would be parading around the grand ballroom in their designer tuxedos and expensive silk gowns, shaking hands and securing their golden future. They would be completely surrounded by the very people who held their financial survival in their manicured hands. Jessica's powerful father would be front and center, proudly introducing Bradley as his brilliant new son-in-law and trusted future business partner. They would be completely relaxed, entirely intoxicated by their own perceived, untouchable status and overflowing champagne. They would never in a million years expect the discarded working-class wife to show up and ruin their pristine coronation. I picked up my phone and dialed Evelyn's private number. When she answered, I did not hesitate or tremble. I told her to prepare the verified state-mandated paternity results, the audited tax evasion documents, and the Horizon Zenith wire transfers. I requested she organize every single piece of evidence into crisp, undeniable presentation folders. I told her we were not going to sit around and wait for an assigned court date to present our overwhelming evidence. We were going to hand-deliver the absolute ugly truth directly to the billionaire who was about to blindly hand over his pristine empire to a family of absolute frauds. The Jenkins family wanted to play a ruthless game of high society chess and assume I was already entirely defeated. They were about to learn that the quiet, unassuming pawn they casually threw away had just crossed the entire board and transformed into a completely unstoppable queen. The isolation of my cheap industrial apartment had become my greatest advantage. For over a week, I had existed as a ghost in the eyes of the Jenkins family. They truly believed I was spending my days weeping into cheap carpet and rationing baby formula. They had completely bought into the illusion of my total defeat. But the reality was that I was sitting at a wobbly laminate table, surrounded by color-coded binders, holding enough explosive evidence to send my estranged husband to federal prison. I just needed the absolute right stage to display my findings. I did not want a private courtroom with sealed records. I wanted a public execution. The universe, it seemed, was more than happy to oblige my desire for theatrical justice. The opportunity arrived on a dreary Tuesday afternoon in the form of a phone call from a woman named Beatrice. Beatrice was a wealthy widow and a longtime member of the local country club. More importantly, she was a woman who absolutely despised Susan Jenkins. For years, Susan had aggressively tried to unseat Beatrice from the hospital charity board, using every underhanded social climbing tactic available. Beatrice saw right through the Jenkins family and their desperate attempts to secure old money status. She also happened to be one of the few high society women who had always treated me with genuine respect during those excruciating holiday brunches. When I answered the phone, Beatrice did not bother with pleasantries. She spoke with the crisp, authoritative tone of a woman who wielded gossip like a highly calibrated weapon. She told me she had just received something in the mail that I absolutely needed to know about. A heavy cream envelope lined with gold foil had been hand-delivered to her estate that very morning. The contents of that envelope were so staggeringly arrogant that even a seasoned socialite like Beatrice was left completely breathless. It was a formal invitation to a massive, extravagant event at the Oak Ridge Country Club. This was not just a simple dinner party. The Jenkins family and Jessica's billionaire father were co-hosting a lavish dual-purpose gala. They were calling it a Bobby dedication and partnership celebration. I sat frozen in my cheap kitchen chair listening to Beatrice read the elegant cursive text over the phone. The sheer audacity of the event was physically nauseating. The evening was designed to publicly cement the impending commercial real estate merger between Bradley's failing brokerage and Jessica's father's massive corporate empire. They were inviting over 150 of the wealthiest investors, politicians, and prominent church members in the state to witness the glorious union of their two powerful families. It was a calculated display of financial dominance meant to assure every major shareholder that Bradley Jenkins was a stable, trustworthy family man, ready to handle a billion-dollar portfolio. But that was not the part that made my blood run absolutely cold. It was the second half of the invitation that ignited a primal, blinding rage deep inside my chest. Beatrice paused, her voice dropping an octave as she read the final lines. The invitation proudly announced that the evening would begin with a formal spiritual dedication of Bradley's precious firstborn son. The words echoed in my small apartment, striking me with the force of a physical blow. Bradley was standing in front of his entire social and professional circle, claiming that Jessica's newborn baby was his very first child. He was formally, publicly, and completely erasing my daughter Lily from existence. He was treating my sweet, innocent 5-week-old baby as if she was nothing more than a clerical error that he had successfully deleted from his permanent record. He believed that his forged mail and paternity test gave him the absolute right to rewrite his own biological history. He was entirely comfortable playing the role of the proud, devoted new father to a billionaire heiress while leaving his actual firstborn daughter to starve in a subsidized apartment. Beatrice remained perfectly quiet on the other end of the line, allowing me to process the absolute cruelty of the situation. She softly told me that she knew the rumors circulating about our sudden divorce were entirely fabricated by Susan. She offered to send a driver to bring me a copy of the invitation. I thanked her profusely, my voice trembling with a mixture of profound gratitude and a terrifying newly awakened fury. When the heavy gold-lined envelope arrived an hour later, I placed it on the table right next to the verified state-mandated DNA results and the audited tax evasion documents. The contrast between the elegant high society stationery and the cold, hard evidence of their massive criminal fraud was absolutely poetic. This was the battlefield I had been waiting for. This was the perfect, highly visible arena where I could inflict the maximum amount of generational damage. They thought they had outsmarted me. They truly believed that because I lacked a trust fund and a designer wardrobe, I was inherently powerless. They assumed that my silence over the past week was the silence of a broken, working-class woman who had finally learned her proper place in the world. They were banking their entire financial future and their pristine social standing on the arrogant assumption that I would simply fade away into the shadows and allow them to rewrite reality. They were about to learn a very brutal lesson about the wrath of a mother whose child has been discarded. I was not going to hire a standard divorce attorney to bicker over alimony in a dusty, quiet courtroom. I was going to walk directly into the glittering heart of their billionaire coronation. I was going to stand in front of their wealthy investors, their judgmental church friends, and Jessica's powerful father. I was going to take their beautiful golden narrative of the perfect firstborn son and the flawless corporate merger, and I was going to burn it to ash in front of a live audience. I picked up my phone and immediately dialed Evelyn Vance. I told my ruthless shark of an attorney that the waiting period was officially over. We had our target. We had our date. The Jenkins family wanted to host a lavish celebration built entirely on lies, medical fraud, and stolen money. I instructed Evelyn to finalize the legal dossiers and prepare for an absolute massacre. We were going to the Oak Ridge Country Club, and we were going to bring the entire Jenkins empire crashing down upon their heads. Getting into the exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club was never going to be a simple task. The Jenkins family had effectively turned the sprawling estate into an impenetrable fortress. They hired private security firms, stationed guards at every wrought iron gate, and utilized a strict digital guest list to ensure no uninvited elements could slip through the cracks. Bradley and his parents were taking zero chances. They knew this partnership celebration was the absolute pinnacle of their social climbing careers, and they wanted the environment hermetically sealed. An ordinary scorned wife would have given up at the front gates. But a seasoned accountant knows that every fortress has a back door, and every massive production relies on invisible labor. I did not need to bypass the menacing security guards because I already held the master key to the service doors. The catering company hired for this extravaganza was owned by a woman named Maria. 5 years ago, Maria was drowning in complex tax debt, terrified that the federal government was going to seize her tiny bakery. I had spent late nights untangling her messy ledgers, negotiating with IRS agents, and restructuring her business model. I did all of it free of charge because I believed in her dream. I silently managed her quarterly filings while she built her bakery into the premier catering service. When I called Maria and explained what the Jenkins family was trying to do to my daughter, she did not hesitate. She told me to be at the loading dock at 6. I stood in front of the cracked mirror and prepared myself for war. I did not wear the soft pastel dresses Bradley always demanded I wear to his country club dinners. I pulled a sharp, tailored black suit. It was the exact suit I wore when I passed my examinations. The dark fabric felt like sleek, impenetrable armor. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun, stripping away any trace of the naive, compliant girl Bradley thought he had married. I was an auditor coming to collect a debt. I carefully slid the heavy black legal binder into my leather satchel. Inside those sleeves rested the court-mandated DNA results, confirming Bradley's paternity, the tax fraud documents, and the wire transfers proving they used my stolen money to buy Jessica's townhouse. The drive to the country club was silent. I rode in the passenger seat of Evelyn Vance's car, watching the wealthy suburban neighborhoods roll past the tinted windows. Evelyn sat beside me, radiating a calm, lethal energy. In the back seat, a process server quietly reviewed the stack of legal summons we had prepared. We parked discreetly down the street from the clubhouse, hidden beneath the branches of ancient oak trees. Evelyn told me she and the server would wait in the shadows until I gave the signal. We had orchestrated the timing down to the second. I stepped out of the car into the cool evening air, clutching my leather satchel. I walked around the perimeter of the clubhouse, slipping past the garden lights and avoiding the valet stand. I found the loading dock exactly where Maria said it would be. The heavy metal service doors were propped open to let the catering staff move massive trays of appetizers inside. Maria spotted me immediately. She grabbed my arm, giving it a firm squeeze, and pulled me directly into the chaotic kitchen. She handed me a spare catering clipboard to complete the illusion, and guided me through the maze of shouting chefs and silverware. We moved seamlessly through the corridors reserved exclusively for the invisible working-class people the Jenkins family routinely ignored. Maria pushed open a door just a fraction of an inch, allowing me to slip into the dark alcove behind the grand ballroom stage. The sensory overload of the event hit me instantly. The ballroom was a display of wealth. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of tables, adorned with towering white floral centerpieces. Waiters in uniforms glided through the crowd, offering silver trays of champagne. I stood perfectly still in the deep shadows, watching the absolute cream of Columbus high society mingle and laugh. My eyes found the center table. Jessica's billionaire father sat holding court, looking pleased with himself. Susan and Robert were seated right next to him, glowing with smug victory. They had finally secured their seat at the table. Then I saw Bradley. He was wearing a tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne, smiling that charming smile I used to love. Jessica stood elegantly by his side, cradling her newborn baby in an antique christening gown. The gentle hum of the string quartet slowly faded away as Robert proudly introduced his son to the stage. Bradley walked up to the microphone, adjusting his lapels as the wealthy crowd beamed up at him. I stood frozen in this dark alcove, my fingers gripping the leather satchel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Bradley cleared his throat and began to speak. He talked eloquently about the profound importance of family values. He spoke about trust, loyalty, and the heavy responsibility of building generational wealth. He looked down at Jessica with a manufactured look of absolute devotion. Then he raised his glass and dedicated the entire evening and his entire future corporate empire to his beautiful new wife and his precious firstborn son. The phrase firstborn son echoed through the massive ballroom, hanging in the air like thick, toxic smoke. He was formally publicly erasing my daughter. The sheer, blinding audacity of his lie caused the air in my lungs to turn to absolute fire. I felt a righteous, consuming inferno. The tension in the room reached an absolute peak as the crowd raised their glasses in a joyous toast to his monumental lie. I slowly placed the borrowed catering clipboard on a nearby table. I gripped my heavy legal binder, stepped out of the comforting shadows, and walked directly into the blinding chandelier light. I stepped out of the shadows and let the heavy velvet curtain fall closed behind me. The grand ballroom of the Oak Ridge Country Club was a dazzling sea of glittering jewels and tailored tuxedos. None of those wealthy elites noticed the working-class accountant moving through their ranks. I kept my posture perfectly straight. The sharp lines of my black suit felt like woven armor protecting me from the overwhelming scent of expensive perfume. I clutched the heavy black binder to my chest, my fingers pressing firmly against the leather. The string quartet was playing a soft classical melody that drifted over the cheerful hum of high society gossip. Up on the raised mahogany stage, Bradley was basking in the glow of his own fraudulent spotlight. He was smiling down at Jessica and the newborn baby, looking every inch the devoted family man. I kept my eyes locked on his face as I moved closer, parting the crowd of investors with a silent, undeniable presence. It is incredible how people instinctively step out of your way when you project a singular, terrifying purpose. As I reached the front row of circular tables, the atmosphere in the room began to violently shift. The wealthy guests seated nearest the stage stopped talking entirely. They turned in their plush chairs to look at the uninvited woman disrupting their billionaire coronation. Susan was seated at the primary VIP table, raising a crystal flute to her lips. She saw me. Her manicured fingers instantly went slack. The expensive champagne glass slipped from her grasp and plummeted to the polished marble floor. The sharp sound of shattering crystal echoed through the enormous ballroom like a cannon blast. The string quartet faltered completely, losing their rhythm before scraping to an awkward, agonizing halt. The sudden, heavy silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Up on the stage, Bradley froze mid-sentence. His charismatic, charming smile curdled into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The color drained from his face so rapidly, he looked as though he might pass out right there behind the podium. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally recognizing the catastrophic mistake he had made by underestimating my resolve. Tyler visibly panicked, his eyes darting frantically toward the service doors looking for a quick, quiet escape. I did not hesitate. I did not give them a single second to recover or summon their private security guards. I walked up the 3 carpeted steps onto the stage. The soft thud of my practical heels felt incredibly loud in the dead quiet room. Bradley took a stumbling step backward, shrinking away from me as I approached the podium. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of my unexpected presence. I reached out with a steady, calm hand and took the heavy silver microphone right out of his trembling fingers. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not display a single ounce of emotional hysteria. I turned to face the sea of stunned, wealthy faces. I spoke with a voice that was cold, clear, and loaded with deadly precision. "I apologize for interrupting this beautiful celebration," I said, my voice booming effortlessly from the massive speakers mounted around the room. "Bradley is up here tonight, proudly celebrating his beautiful new son and his dedication to family loyalty. But I think he conveniently forgot to mention the newborn daughter he abandoned in a hospital delivery room exactly 8 weeks ago." I let the brutal words hang in the heavy, suffocating air. A collective gasp rippled through the expansive ballroom. Women covered their mouths in absolute shock, and wealthy investors exchanged alarmed, panicked glances. Beside Bradley, Jessica let out a confused, strangled cry, clutching her infant tight to her chest. She looked at Bradley, demanding an immediate explanation. But he remained absolutely speechless, his entire fraudulent world crumbling into dust under the bright chandelier light. Susan was clawing at Robert's arm, her face twisted in a desperate, silent plea for him to do something to stop the bleeding. But they were entirely powerless. I had completely stripped away their protective wealth and exposed the rotting foundation underneath. Before Bradley could stammer out a pathetic manufactured lie, a towering figure moved aggressively from the center table. Richard, Jessica's billionaire father, stood up, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. He was an intimidating man who commanded absolute authority with every heavy step. He did not look angry. He looked calculating and profoundly dangerous. He walked directly to the edge of the stage, ignoring the frantic, desperate apologies Robert was trying to throw at him from the surrounding tables. Richard stopped at the base of the steps, looking up at me with cold, piercing eyes. He demanded to know exactly who I was, and what I was doing ruining his daughter's dedication ceremony. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried the massive weight of a man who could destroy lives with a single phone call. I looked down at the billionaire real estate magnate and felt zero fear. "I am Chloe Jenkins," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "I am Bradley's legal wife, and I am an accountant who just finished auditing his entire operation." I walked down the stairs and stopped right in front of Richard, holding out the thick black binder. "Inside this folder, you will find a state-supervised DNA test, proving Bradley is the father of my discarded 8-week-old daughter," I told him, keeping my gaze locked. "You will also find verified tax records and wire transfers, proving the Jenkins family stole my personal savings and committed massive federal tax evasion to purchase the luxury townhouse your daughter currently lives in." I pushed the heavy binder firmly into Richard's large hands. "I strongly suggest you read every single page before you sign any merger documents with these absolute criminals." The absolute silence in the grand ballroom was completely deafening. Over 150 of the wealthiest investors, politicians, and elite socialites in Columbus stood absolutely paralyzed. They were entirely captivated by the sudden, violent disruption of their high society coronation. Richard opened the heavy black leather binder I had just pressed into his hands. His sharp, calculating eyes scanned the top document, immediately recognizing the official state seal of the Ohio Department of Health. It was the court-mandated DNA test. I watched the exact moment his analytical brain processed the 99.9% probability of paternity. His jaw clenched so tightly the muscles visibly fluttered under his weathered skin. Bradley took a desperate, stumbling step forward, reaching out with trembling, sweating hands to try and snatch the binder away from the billionaire. Richard simply raised one massive hand, stopping the younger man dead in his tracks without uttering a single syllable. The power dynamic in the room shifted so violently you could practically feel the air pressure drop inside the venue. I did not lower my voice or shrink back. I wanted every single person in that lavish room to hear the absolute, undeniable truth. I looked directly into Richard's cold, furious eyes and calmly explained exactly what he was holding. I instructed him to turn to the second tab in the binder to review the audited financial ledgers. I clearly detailed how the man intending to marry his daughter had maliciously embezzled $45,000 from his own marital savings account. I explained exactly how Tyler's unregistered shell company called Horizon Zenith was utilized to funnel those stolen funds directly into the down payment for Jessica's luxury townhouse. I made sure my voice echoed clearly off the towering crystal chandeliers as I revealed that the money was completely unreported to the federal government. I told the room that this was not just a messy domestic dispute, but a case of blatant, undeniable tax evasion and corporate fraud. Bradley was physically shaking now. His perfectly tailored designer tuxedo suddenly looked entirely too large for his rapidly shrinking frame. He stammered something incoherent, attempting to call me crazy, and attempting to deploy his usual manipulative gaslighting tactics to regain control of the narrative. But there is absolutely no gaslighting your way out of verified federal tax fraud when the physical proof is resting directly in the hands of your primary investor. I turned my attention back to Richard, delivering the final crushing blow with deadly precision. You are preparing to merge your pristine billion-dollar real estate empire with a man who commits severe tax evasion and falsifies medical records to abandon his newborn child, I told him. I asked him if that was the kind of criminal liability he really wanted permanently attached to his family name and his legacy. Right on cue, the heavy brass doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a dramatic, echoing thud. Every head in the room snapped around to see Evelyn Vance striding down the center aisle. My attorney looked like an absolute avenging angel in her crisp charcoal suit, radiating magnificent dominance. Walking directly behind her was the burly process server we had hired, holding a thick stack of manila envelopes. Evelyn did not stop to mingle or offer polite greetings to the wealthy guests. She marched straight up to the stage, her heels clicking a steady, intimidating rhythm against the polished marble floor. Susan let out a strangled, pathetic whimper, recognizing the infamous, ruthless lawyer who had financially destroyed her husband's previous shady investments a decade ago. Evelyn stopped next to me, projecting an aura of total, absolute victory. The process server stepped around us and walked right up to a sweating, trembling Bradley. He shoved a thick, sealed envelope directly against Bradley's chest, forcing him to take it. Bradley Jenkins, the server, announced, his voice ringing out with beautiful clarity over the silent crowd. "You have been formally served." Evelyn then turned her predatory gaze toward Tyler, who was desperately trying to slip away toward the kitchen service corridor in the back. The server caught him by the shoulder and handed him a matching envelope. "Tyler Jenkins, you have been served for your active role in corporate asset concealment and fraudulent business practices." Evelyn loudly and proudly announced the contents of the revised divorce petition for the entire ballroom to hear. She declared that we were no longer playing defense against their predatory demands. We were officially demanding maximum alimony, total, retroactive, and future child support, and absolute legal custody of Lily. We were seeking the immediate liquidation of the Horizon Zenith townhouse to repay the stolen marital funds with heavy interest. Furthermore, Evelyn informed the stunned crowd that certified copies of the financial audit had already been submitted to the Internal Revenue Service and the State Licensing Board. Bradley's real estate brokerage license was effectively suspended pending a massive federal criminal investigation. The complete collapse of the Jenkins family was absolute and immediate. Richard slammed the black binder shut and turned to look at Bradley with pure, unfiltered revulsion. He told Bradley that the commercial merger was completely, entirely dead. He added that if Bradley ever contacted his daughter again, he would personally ensure the federal prosecutors had unlimited funding to lock him away for decades. Jessica burst into hysterical tears, shoving the microphone stand out of her way as she fled the stage, running toward the safety of her father's private security detail. Susan finally collapsed into a nearby chair, sobbing uncontrollably into her expensive silk gown, as the realization of their total social and financial ruin completely washed over her. Robert simply stood there, staring blankly at the floor, a ruined man watching his entire legacy turn to dust in a matter of minutes. I did not stay to watch the rest of their pathetic breakdown. I had delivered the undeniable truth. I had permanently secured my daughter's future. I had protected my own professional integrity while completely obliterating the monsters who tried to bury me in the dirt. I turned around and walked back down the center aisle side by side with Evelyn Vance. The wealthy guests who had previously looked at me with disdain now parted like the Red Sea, giving me a wide, respectful berth. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air. I took a deep, cleansing breath. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for months was finally permanently gone. I was walking back to my sweet daughter, not as a discarded victim, but as a fierce, victorious mother who had fought the ultimate war and absolutely won. The morning after the country club disaster broke bright and incredibly clear over the city of Columbus. I stood in my modest kitchen brewing a simple pot of coffee while the local business news played softly on my laptop screen. The anchor was already aggressively discussing the sudden, shocking collapse of the highly anticipated Richard Holdings merger. There was no dramatic music or cinematic slow motion occurring in my apartment, just the quiet, steady hum of severe consequences finally catching up to arrogant people. I poured my dark coffee into a mug and watched the inevitable dominoes begin to tumble exactly as I had orchestrated them. A lie is a remarkably heavy structure to carry, and the entire Jenkins family had just been permanently crushed under the crushing weight of their own monumental deception. The dust was rapidly settling over their carefully manufactured lives, leaving absolutely nothing behind but scattered debris. Jessica's billionaire father Richard did not accumulate his massive generational wealth by tolerating public liabilities. Within 12 hours of my stage appearance, he executed a ruthless, scorched earth protocol that left the local financial district absolutely reeling. He publicly announced the immediate termination of the commercial real estate merger, citing irreconcilable ethical differences and a complete lack of corporate transparency. He did not stop at simply killing the lucrative corporate deal. He systematically severed his daughter from Bradley with the exact same cold precision he routinely used to liquidate failing assets. Jessica, who was entirely accustomed to limitless wealth and absolute unbothered comfort, packed her designer bags and vacated the luxury townhouse before the weekend was even over. She took the newborn baby and retreated straight back into the safety of her father's heavily guarded estate, leaving Bradley completely and utterly alone. Richard made it perfectly clear to every local media outlet that his pristine family name would never be associated with a man actively under federal investigation for marital fraud and tax evasion. Bradley lost his golden ticket, his trophy fiancé, and his billion-dollar future in a single, devastating stroke of a pen. The financial devastation Bradley faced was even more absolute than his highly public social ruin. The meticulously organized audit I had submitted directly to the Internal Revenue Service triggered an immediate, aggressive federal response. Bradley's real estate brokerage was officially categorized as a high-risk entity and subjected to a brutal, comprehensive government freeze. Federal agents unceremoniously descended upon his sleek downtown office, confiscating computer hard drives, physical ledgers, and completely locking down his primary operating accounts. Every single dollar he had tried to hide, every hefty commission he had illegally routed to avoid proper taxation, was suddenly trapped securely behind miles of federal red tape. Bradley could not pay his slick, expensive defense attorneys. He could not pay his arrogant office staff who quickly abandoned the sinking ship. He could not even buy a cup of premium coffee without the government tightly tracking the transaction. He was financially paralyzed, suffocating in the exact sophisticated trap he had so proudly built to destroy me. His older brother Tyler fared absolutely no better under the crushing weight of the judicial system. My attorney, Evelyn Vance, moved with terrifying speed to completely dismantle Horizon Zenith. Because we had successfully documented the exact wire transfers, proving Tyler willingly used my stolen marital funds to purchase the townhouse, the family court judge ordered the immediate forced liquidation of his precious shell company. The local court seized the luxury property, initiated an emergency market sale, and funneled my original $45,000 directly back into my secure private accounts, with incredibly hefty judicial interest attached. Tyler was violently stripped of his clever businessman persona. He was left with thousands of dollars in legal fines, a permanently ruined credit score, and a completely shattered reputation in the competitive commercial lending sector. The arrogant older brother who thought he was legally untouchable was suddenly reduced to a frantic, sweating mess, desperately dodging relentless calls from angry creditors. The final and perhaps most deeply fitting punishment fell squarely upon Susan and Robert. For decades, they had meticulously cultivated a delicate illusion of supreme high society elegance. They viewed their elevated status at the Oak Ridge Country Club as their ultimate crowning achievement in life. But elite high society is a remarkably fickle and unforgiving beast. It violently rejects anything that remotely smells like public scandal or sudden poverty. By Monday morning, the country club board of directors held an emergency closed-door meeting regarding the gala incident. They formally, politely, and ruthlessly requested that Susan and Robert step down from all charity committee positions and quietly surrender their exclusive memberships. They were suddenly deemed socially radioactive. The wealthy friends they had spent years desperately trying to impress now crossed the street to avoid making accidental eye contact. Susan was unceremoniously uninvited from every upcoming charity gala, every seasonal holiday brunch, and every exclusive garden party in the district. She and Robert were completely trapped inside their sprawling, heavily mortgaged suburban home, with absolutely nowhere to go, and no one left to impress. The glittering, flawless image they had aggressively protected at the terrible cost of their own innocent grandchild had completely evaporated. They had sacrificed their basic human decency for a seat at a table that no longer wanted them. As I sat in my quiet, peaceful apartment holding my sweet daughter close to my chest, I knew the war was finally over. The Jenkins family was left with absolutely nothing but the raw, bitter reality of their own reflection, while Lily and I were entirely free to begin a beautiful, honest new life together. The morning sunlight pours through the large bay windows of my new living room, casting a warm golden glow across the pristine hardwood floors. I sit comfortably on a plush cream sofa, wrapped in a thick woven blanket, holding a mug of freshly brewed coffee. A few feet away, my beautiful daughter Lily is happily babbling on a thick pastel playmat, reaching for a brightly colored plush toy. There is no heavy, suffocating tension in the air. There are no condescending whispers, no fake high society expectations, and absolutely no lies hiding in the shadows of this house. This home belongs entirely to us. It was purchased with the funds I rightfully recovered, and it is completely fortified by the peace I fought so ruthlessly to secure. 6 months have passed since I walked out of that country club ballroom and left the Jenkins family to drown in the ruins of their own monumental deception. The transition from a terrified, discarded wife hiding in a cheap industrial apartment to an independent, empowered mother living in a beautiful suburban sanctuary did not happen by accident. It was the direct result of precision patience and an absolute refusal to remain a victim. The final legal proceedings were surprisingly brief and profoundly satisfying. When you corner an arrogant man with documented federal tax fraud and irrefutable proof of medical forgery, he quickly loses his appetite for a prolonged courtroom battle. Bradley was completely paralyzed by the looming federal investigations and the massive financial freeze placed on his failing brokerage. He signed every single document Evelyn Vance pushed across the polished mediation table without a single word of protest. The financial settlement was staggering. I was awarded the entirety of our remaining liquid assets, a massive lump sum representing my rightful half of his previously hidden accounts and total retroactive child support. Furthermore, the family court judge looked at Bradley's fabricated paternity documents with absolute disgust and immediately granted me full absolute sole custody of Lily. Bradley legally surrendered all parental rights, attempting to minimize his catastrophic public exposure. He essentially traded his own flesh and blood for a slightly reduced sentence in the court of public opinion, but his reputation was already entirely reduced to ash. He walked out of that courthouse, a broken, completely isolated man, while I walked out holding the sole undisputed claim to my daughter's beautiful future. My personal victory seamlessly translated into an unexpected professional triumph. I returned to my accounting firm not as the quiet, compliant woman who always took on extra hours without complaint, but as a seasoned auditor who had single-handedly dismantled a sophisticated corporate fraud ring. My senior partners had watched the entire Jenkins scandal unfold across the local business news networks. They saw exactly how I meticulously tracked the hidden Horizon Zenith wire transfers and exposed a massive tax evasion scheme using nothing but my intellect and basic banking ledgers. Within a month, I was called into the managing partner's expansive office and offered a massive promotion. I was elevated to senior forensic auditor, leading an entire team dedicated to uncovering corporate financial deception. The profound irony is never lost on me. Bradley and his elitist parents constantly degraded my profession, calling me a simple calculator and a working-class mistake. They treated my career as a cute little hobby, completely unaware that the very skills they ruthlessly mocked would become the exact weapons I used to completely dismantle their fake empire. I am now earning a substantial 6-figure salary, easily providing Lily with the beautiful life she deserves, without ever needing to rely on a man who viewed us as disposable burdens. As I sit here watching Lily smile at the morning sunlight, I finally understand the true, profound lesson of this entire nightmare. For years, I was completely trapped in a toxic psychological cycle, believing that if I was simply agreeable enough, accommodating enough, and quiet enough, the Jenkins family would eventually value me. I twisted myself into painful knots, trying to fit into their pristine designer mold. I accepted their casual cruelty and their relentless condescension, because I was conditioned to believe that family requires endless, painful sacrifice. I thought that keeping the peace meant swallowing my own voice. But true love is never a calculated transaction. It is not a shiny status symbol you have to constantly earn through absolute obedience and silent suffering. When people treat you as a utility when they look at you and only see what you can do for them, or how you can advance their social standing, they are not loving you. They are simply using you to build their own fragile castles. Walking away from toxic people, even people you once loved deeply, is never a betrayal. It is the purest, most essential form of personal survival. I learned the hard way that boundaries are not just imaginary lines we draw to keep bad things out. Boundaries are the incredibly strong protective walls we build to keep our peace, our sanity, and our self-respect perfectly safe inside. I used to think I was weak because I actively avoided conflict and craved harmony. Now I know I possess a quiet, calculated strength that can tear down entire fraudulent empires brick by brick. I was never the broken, sick woman they desperately wanted me to be. I was a survivor simply waiting for the perfect moment to realize my own absolute worth. I no longer live my life looking over my shoulder or waiting for someone else to validate my existence. I am completely whole. If you have ever been made to feel like you were not enough by people who were secretly using you, I want you to know you hold the power to write your own bottom line. You are not a victim. You are a survivor. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Do not forget to comment your thoughts below. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.